The hum of the airplane engines vibrated through my bones as I tried to settle into the narrow economy seat. Even in the climate-controlled cabin, sweat beaded along my hairline, a mixture of anxiety and the lingering Miami heat. My fingers trembled slightly as I checked for the fourth time that Jaime's pacifier was within reach in the diaper bag stuffed under the seat in front of me. "Shh, baby boy. We're almost there," I whispered, bouncing my 8-month-old son gently on my lap. His little face was flushed, his lower lip quivering with the threat of another crying spell. The elderly woman across the aisle had already shot us 3 disapproving glances, and we hadn't even taken off yet. I couldn't blame her. Who wanted to sit near a potentially screaming infant on a 5-hour flight? But what choice did I have? My mother was dying, actually dying this time, not one of her usual dramatic pleas for attention, and this was likely the last chance for her to meet her grandson. The borrowed money for these tickets sat like a stone in my stomach. 3 months' worth of rent from Lisa, my only friend who still believed in me despite everything. "Pay me back whenever you can," she had said. But we both knew whenever might be never. Trying to distract myself, I adjusted Jaime on my lap and finally lowered into the seat, praying he would stay calm. I hadn't even buckled my belt when a shadow fell across me. "Excuse me." The voice was deep with the faintest accent I couldn't place. Something European, refined yet edged with roughness that made my skin prickle. I looked up and up and up. He stood in the aisle, tall and imposing in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my salary at the diner. Perfectly tailored to broad shoulders, no tie, just the crisp edge of a white collar against olive skin. But it was his eyes that froze me in place. Dark as espresso, heavy-lidded, assessing me with cool detachment. "That's my seat." My stomach dropped. I blinked down at the boarding pass in my lap. Row 14, seat A. But his gaze was unwavering, coldly authoritative, fixed on the very place where I sat. I thought, "You're in my seat." His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it made the words slam through me. Heat crept up my neck. God. Of course I had messed it up. Of course I had sat in the wrong seat on a packed flight, balancing a baby and 3 bags. And of course the person I had displaced turned out to be this larger-than-life man who looked like he had stepped out of a magazine spread. "I'm so sorry," I blurted, already scrambling to stand, my arms clumsy around Jaime. But before I could move, his hand shot out, pressing firmly against the top of the seat back. Not touching me, but blocking my exit with a quiet authority that made my pulse trip. "Sit." The single command cut through my flustered apology. I froze, looking up at him, unsure I'd heard right. He leaned closer, his voice pitched low, rough around the edges. "From now on, you're mine." The words weren't loud, but they left no room for argument. They hung in the air between us, shocking and magnetic all at once. I swallowed hard, clutching Jaime closer. "I what?" His eyes didn't waver. I don't repeat myself. For a moment it felt like the cabin had gone silent, though the engines still roared and passengers still shifted restlessly around us. His presence filled every inch of space, drawing all the oxygen out of the air until I could hardly breathe. Finally, he stepped past me, sliding into the window seat with surprising economy of movement. The subtle brush of his shoulder against mine felt deliberate. He settled, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket with calm precision, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. A faint scent traveled with him, not cologne, but something deeper, elemental. Sandalwood, maybe with notes of leather and something metallic I couldn't name. The smell of money, the smell of danger, Jaime whimpered, his little fists balling up against my chest. My nerves shot through the roof as I fumbled for his bottle, desperate to keep him quiet. The last thing I needed was to draw more attention in front of this unnerving stranger. "First flight?" he asked suddenly. His voice was neutral, but there was an edge beneath it, as if he already knew the answer. "Is it that obvious?" I tried to laugh, but it came out tight. He didn't smile. Just a slight incline of his head, his eyes sliding toward the window as the flight attendants began the safety demonstration. I noticed his hands resting on his thighs. They were large, with neatly trimmed nails, but the knuckles were slightly misshapen. Fighter's hands, rough and lived in, completely at odds with his aristocratic profile. The plane began to taxi, and Jaime's whimpers escalated into full-blown cries. Panic rose in me as I dug frantically through the diaper bag, my hands trembling so badly I nearly spilled the formula. "May I?" The question startled me. He was holding out his hand. "What? The bottle? You're about to drop it. Let me hold it while you adjust the boy." I blinked at him, then reluctantly handed it over. His grip was firm, steady, practiced. I shifted Jaime into the crook of my arm, and when I looked up again, the stranger was testing the temperature of the formula on his wrist. The motion was so natural it stunned me. "It's fine," he said, passing it back. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, and a sharp current traveled up my arm. His skin was warm, dry, slightly calloused, like someone who had built and destroyed in equal measure. Jaime latched onto the bottle immediately, his cries silenced. Relief swept through me so strong I nearly sagged into the seat. "Thank you," I murmured. He inclined his head, the barest acknowledgement, and returned to staring out the window as if the conversation were over. As the plane lifted, the cabin pressure shifted, and Jaime's eyelids began to flutter closed. I dared to exhale, my muscles aching with the effort of keeping it all together. For the next hour, silence reigned, if not in my head, at least in the row. I transferred Jaime into the carrier strapped to my chest, his tiny breaths feathering against my collarbone, the warm weight both soothing and suffocating. My exhaustion pressed down heavier with each passing minute. 3 nights of double shifts at the diner, followed by packing and panicking over this trip, had left me running on fumes. I fought to stay awake, knowing I shouldn't let myself slip, but my body betrayed me. My head nodded once, twice, until I jolted upright, realizing with horror how close I had leaned toward him again. His dark eyes shifted to mine, unreadable. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw amusement, or maybe possession. "Relax," he murmured, his tone velvet smooth and commanding at once. "I already told you. You're mine." He said it then, not as a threat exactly, but as a claim. The word slid under my skin and settled there. "From now on, you're mine." They sounded absurdly intimate and disturbingly final. I pressed my palm over Jaime's back, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and tried to tell myself I wasn't shaking because of the man beside me. We deplaned in a slow, grinding line. He moved with a confidence that parted the crowd as if the world gave way for him. People stepped aside, some openly admiring, others wary. Marco, because that's what the man at his elbow later introduced himself as, walked a pace in front, scanning, blocking, like an invisible perimeter that followed Luca's orbit. "Thank you for the ride," I managed at the gate, because manners still mattered even when fear sat at the base of my throat. He inclined his head once. "You're welcome." The softness of the reply didn't match the hardness that hung in his shoulders. At baggage claim, my heart hammered. I'd planned a quick thank you, some awkward apology, then disappear into the anonymity of the terminal. Instead, Luca had already taken control. The SUV waiting at the curb was black and immaculate, tinted windows reflecting the late-hour lights. Marco popped the trunk and retrieved my tattered suitcase with the yellow ribbon. I couldn't help the prickle of shame as my bag looked like something that didn't belong in such polished surroundings. "You have people," I said, incredulous. "I have people who ensure things run smoothly," Luca corrected, his voice even. His gaze flicked to Jaime and then to me, assessing. "There's a car. It will take you where you need to go." "My mother's expecting us," I said, the protest catching on my lips. "Brookhaven. I'll take a taxi." He checked his watch, an expensive glint that made my stomach twist. "It's nearly midnight. A taxi might refuse. My car is paid for. There will be no detour." The finality in his tone made argument pointless. When Marco offered to carry the diaper bag, I snapped a protest that dissolved under the weight of exhaustion and the hungry wail that Jaime suddenly released. The ride to Brookhaven was cloaked in a silence that felt like it could snap. I tried to count streetlights, trace the familiar landmarks from memory, to keep my mind from spinning at the unasked questions. How did he know where my mother lived? Why was he doing this? Who was he, really? He needs changing, Luca said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. I braced for indignation, for a shove of boundary. I'll do it, I said, because I always did. But Marco already had the portable changing kit ready, and Luca's car, of course, contained a built-in changing surface, diapers, wipes, clothing, brands I'd never heard of in my life. The efficiency of it was infuriating. You don't have to struggle, Luca said, and there was an edge, soft but unmistakable, in the way he said it that made me want to bark back that I didn't need charity. You assume too much, I snapped. Then the sound of Jaime's small, wet breath against my chest made everything trivial. I took the diaper from Marco's hands and felt like a thief in a home I hadn't consented to. We pulled up half a block from my mother's bungalow. I'll walk the rest, I insisted. I didn't want to be seen arriving in the car with this stranger. The look Luca gave me as he stepped out beside me was unreadable. He placed a light hand at the small of my back to guide me toward the sidewalk. The touch was incidental, but it burned. Mrs. Vasquez, my childhood neighbor's housekeeper who'd looked after my mother years ago, opened the door before I reached the porch. "Miss Ellie," she cried, ushering us inside with a warmth that almost undid me. The house was impossibly tidy, the air lemon-scented, a crib set up in what had once been my mother's sewing room. It felt like an intrusion dressed up as care. "You didn't have to," I started, but Luca's presence filled the room like a shadow. He moved around gently with Jaime in his arms, careful as if the child were glass. The sight of him soothing Jaime with easy murmurs that sounded like words in Italian made an odd softness bloom in my chest I couldn't trust. 3 days blurred into a montage of hospital rooms and whispered consultations. My mother took a turn that left me numb. Machines beeping, doctors' faces mercifully direct. Through it all, Luca hovered at the edges like a sentinel. He paid the bills without flourish, handled the funeral logistics, arranged a specialist to consult, and left no paper unturned. I should have been furious, this stranger sweeping our lives into order. But when the bills were paid and a tear-soaked list of chores vanished like a bad dream, gratitude leaked through my defenses. "You don't have to do this," I told him the night before the funeral, the words barely louder than the machines. "I don't expect you to repay me," he said. "Consider it an investment." The last word tasted like coin. The funeral was quiet, dignified. My mother's friends and distant family clustered around, offering platitudes that felt both sincere and hollow. I moved through the service in a fog, clutching Jaime and watching Luca move through the crowd with an authority that made murmurs hush and pockets of respect open. He held Jaime like he had known him forever, and people smiled as if that proved some kind of goodness. After the service, while guests drifted away, Luca sat across from me at my mother's kitchen table and laid a small velvet box between us. "What is that?" I asked, though the metallic glint of the ring inside answered before he could speak. He didn't look defensive. "A proposal," he said evenly. "Marriage," I laughed, sharp and unbelieving. "You can't be serious." "I am," he said. "I want you and Jaime to come with me to New York. I will provide a home, security, everything he needs. In return?" "In return?" My voice tinged with fear. "What do you want?" "Your company, your presence, to be family." His words were simple, as if arranging a business contract rather than proposing a life-altering union. "You want to marry me?" I repeated. "You barely know me." "In 3 days I have seen enough," he said. "I've watched how you care for that boy. There is something honest in you that I want." The absurdity of it, being offered a life like this for the price of saying yes, wrenched at something primal. "And what of the rest? Your business, what exactly do you do?" I demanded, because the unspoken question hummed in my head. If he could arrange specialists, cars, and staff overnight, what else came with him? Luca's gaze turned distant for a moment. "My family built an empire," he said finally, and his voice carried a weight I didn't want to measure. "There are things I cannot share, Ellie. There will be danger at times, but I protect what's mine." Those words, "what's mine," felt like the echo of that first claim on the plane. They were possessive, and they made my skin tighten with warning. Yet the alternatives were stark. Return to Miami with debts, no safety net, a baby to feed and rent due, or accept a marriage that guaranteed security and offered a life for Jaime that I couldn't otherwise provide. "I need time," I said, because I had to stall. I had to think beyond grief and fear. He nodded once. 3 days, he said. 3 days to decide. That is all. The night I agreed to take his card, more practical than anything else, I felt unsteady. He left a business card pressed into my palm, heavy with a phone number and a name I could hardly weigh. "Call any time," he said. "Day or night." During the days that followed, Marco's presence outside the house and Mrs. Vasquez's quiet competence inside made the world feel stitched by someone else. I searched Luca's name on my mother's ancient computer, pulling up hazy references, restaurants, imports, whispers that suggested money and influence, but nothing solid enough to prove criminal enterprise. The lack of clarity both calmed and unnerved me. At the end of the 3rd day, the SUV pulled up once more. Luca stood at the doorstep with a small smile and the same impossible calm. In his hand was another box. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. I looked at Jaime playing on the floor with a wooden worry stone Luca had left. Jaime's laughter bright, innocent, unconcerned with bargains. My heart stuttered. "Yes," I said, though even as the word left my mouth I felt like I'd stepped off a cliff. "Yes, but with conditions." He listened as I listed them. Control of a bank account, honesty where possible, no forced intimacy until trust existed. He considered each with a patience that made my demands sound reasonable. Finally he nodded. Agreed. He fastened a small gold necklace with a key pendant around my throat and said softly, "A promise." Then he told me we would leave for New York the next day. As I lay awake that night, the key cool at my collarbone, I wondered if I had saved us or sold us. I wanted to tell myself I had chosen survival. I wanted to believe that whatever darkness lived in his world would never touch Jaime. But under the weight of grief and the hush of the house, I couldn't tell whether the future I'd accepted would be protection or imprisonment. Either way, there was no turning back now. That evening, the house wore a hush I'd never heard before, like it was holding its breath with me. Mrs. Vasquez moved through the rooms with that soft-footed care she had, closing drawers gently, folding what few clothes I owned into neat, respectful stacks. She labeled boxes with a looping hand that made everything look kinder than it felt. Ellie. Winter. Jaime. Sleep, bath, linens. The labels made departing seem ordinary, like we were any other family preparing for a long trip. Not a woman and her baby being absorbed into a stranger's orbit. Marco's SUV idled half a block down. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He existed like weather. Present. Watchful. Neither friendly nor hostile. Just inevitable. I tried not to look at the window because the sight of the vehicle made my heart spike. But somehow knowing it was there steadied me too, if I let myself admit it. The constancy felt like something I hadn't had in years. When the last of the baby bottles were sterilized and a zippered pouch held formula, wipes, and pacifiers in militant order, Mrs. Vasquez wiped her hands on a towel and turned to me. "He set up a schedule for the car," she said, voice low, as if the walls might try to overhear. 7 in the morning. I'll be here at 6 to help you dress the little one and close the house." "The house," I echoed, looking around at the freshly made bed, the vase of daisies he'd sent instead of lilies. "It won't feel like mine after this. It hasn't felt like yours for a long time." Her eyes softened. "It was hers. Now you need a place that belongs to you and the boy." She didn't say with him, but the words hovered. After she left, the rooms felt too big, too quiet. Jaime breathed small, even breaths in the crib that had appeared as if by spell. I stood at the doorway watching him for a long time, one hand wrapped around the key pendant at my throat. The metal was cool, solid, a promise or a trap depending on the angle of the light. My phone buzzed. A number I hadn't saved, but already knew by heart, lit the screen. "Is everything ready?" I stared at the glow for several seconds before typing back, "Yes." There was a pause, and then, "Sleep. Tomorrow is a beginning." I wanted to ask of what, but I locked the phone and set it face down. The house ticked and settled around me, and for the first time since my mother's last word, "Be strong," I let myself cry so quietly, even the baby monitor didn't catch it. When the tears finally ran out, I crawled into bed without undressing and lay on top of the covers, the key pendant a small weight against my sternum, like a coin paid on a crossing I hadn't chosen. Dawn came silver and blunt. Mrs. Vasquez kept her promise. By 6, there was coffee warming the kitchen air and a soft clatter of cups that made it almost possible to pretend we were just early risers. Jaime woke with a squeal and a stretch that exposed a belly I kissed 3 times in a row until he giggled hard enough to hiccup. I dressed him in a simple soft onesie and the tiny cardigan Mrs. Vasquez had knit when he was born. It was too small now, but I folded it and tucked it into the diaper bag because some pieces of the past had to come with us, even if they didn't fit. At 6:58, a precise knock sounded. 3 taps, measured. Marco. I gathered the diaper bag, lifted Jaime to my hip, and took one last look around. The daisies hadn't wilted yet. The bed was made. The air held lemon and something like closure. Outside, the morning felt new and uncaring. The SUV door opened before I reached it. "Good morning, Ms. Sullivan," Marco said with that careful neutrality that felt like a courtesy. He took the suitcase without comment, then the diaper bag. I kept my son. The drive to the airport was smooth, the sort of seamless experience people write reviews about. I watched the city unspool through the window. Every highway sign felt like a sentence ending. When we pulled up to the private terminal, of course there was a private terminal, I nearly said I couldn't go through with it. The words made it as far as my tongue and died there when I saw him. Luca stood beside the steps to a small jet, sleeves of a dark jacket pushed to his forearms, watch catching the weak sun. He looked like control-made flesh. He had the kind of stillness that made other people move around him faster. As we approached, his gaze cut to me, then softened fractionally when it slid to Jaime. "Good morning," he said. No flourish, no greeting that pretended we were something we weren't. He reached, slowly, carefully, and brushed a knuckle against Jaime's cheek. "Ready?" I nodded because words seemed dangerous, like they might spill too many meanings. We boarded. The cabin was understated, more quiet wealth than obscene display. A flight attendant with intelligent eyes offered coffee and water, her professionalism a texture the whole way through. Luca took the seat opposite mine, not beside me, and that, somehow, unclenched something in my chest. Takeoffs used to make me sick. This one didn't. Maybe it was the sleep finally banked in my body. Maybe it was the fact that I had run out of choices. The ground dropped away and clouds opened like clean pages. For the first 20 minutes, neither of us spoke, as if words might scuff the pristine quiet. Jaime pressed his palm to the window and said "bah" at the white outside like it might answer. Luca watched him with the sort of attention I had only ever seen in pediatricians and people who want things. "Paperwork is ready," he said eventually, voice low. If you still want a small ceremony, we can do that this afternoon. Or simply notarize and wait on the formalities. I swallowed. Small, I said. I didn't want the pretense of celebration stamped on top of grief. Something quiet. Quiet, he repeated, as if that were a binding term we had agreed to. He slid a file folder across the table that separated us. Read, ask questions. Nothing will be signed until you're comfortable. I didn't open it yet. I didn't want to think in clauses and provisions. I looked at him instead. If I say no when we land? His mouth shifted. Not a smile, not displeasure. Then I will take you to a hotel, put cash in your account, and make sure your utilities in Miami are current when you return. Marco will connect you with a reputable agent who will show you apartments in safer neighborhoods. I meant what I said, Ellie. I do not undo care. And the watching from a distance? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Protection you didn't ask for is another word for control. He didn't flinch. It is another word for vigilance. But yes, it is also control. I will not apologize for wanting you safe. I will apologize if I fail to respect your boundaries. You will tell me when I miss them. I couldn't decide if the honesty made him better or worse. New York greeted us with a sky that looked scrubbed and overstated. The car waiting at the foot of the stairs was different, sleek in a way that spoke of old taste, not new money. The city's noise braided through the windows as we sped along the FDR, a ripple of honks and sirens that felt like someone else's heartbeat. We didn't go to a hotel. We didn't go to a courthouse. We went to a townhouse fronted by a narrow set of steps and a door the color of a bruise. Inside was space and warmth, and the sort of quiet that costs a lot to maintain. Staff appeared the way birds appear when you scatter seed, soundless and efficient, and then vanished again. "Show Ms. Sullivan the rooms," Luca said, his voice wrapped in velvet over steel. A woman in her 50s with architectural hair led me up a polished staircase. Jaime laughed at the echo of our steps and patted the banister like it was a friend. The nursery made my eyes sting. Someone had studied my son's things, and then built a room that felt like a promise. Moon mobile, soft rug, a reading chair that understood exhaustion. I stood in the doorway holding Jaime like a buoy, and felt something inside me tilt toward relief so hard it scared me. Luca didn't crowd. He let the house do the speaking. When I finally came back downstairs, Jaime drowsy on my shoulder, he was where I had left him, hands in his pockets, gaze on the window. He turned as if he'd felt me cross the threshold. "Lunch?" he said. "Then a notary. The ceremony tomorrow, unless you prefer today." "Tomorrow," I said, because 24 hours felt like a kindness to the parts of me that hadn't caught up. He nodded once, like a judge entering a verdict that pleased him. Tomorrow. The notary arrived with gray hair and a smile that was small and genuine. Papers were laid out, explained in clean language. My own bank account was established with a transfer I couldn't quite look at. Provisions were clear. Housing in my name. Medical care for Jaime guaranteed without limit. Clauses that insisted on my consent in decisions that mattered. It felt unreal to initial line after line that all seemed to be on my side. When it was done, Luca didn't reach for me. He asked instead if I wanted a nap. The sudden, violent affection I felt for the offer knocked me off balance. Jaime surrendered to sleep like he owed it a debt. I lay beside him on a bed that smelled like new cotton and unfamiliar woods. The pendant cool against my skin. The city a distant thrum. My last thought before sleep pulled me under was that safety is a sensation first and a fact second. Evening thickened and the townhouse changed temperature like it breathed with the sun. I woke to a soft knock. A tray waited outside the door with broth, bread, a note tucked under the napkin in handwriting I recognized from the card. Eat. You need your strength. I ate because I did. After, I carried Jaime to the window and showed him a sliver of skyline he didn't understand, and maybe I didn't either. The future pressed its palm to the glass from the other side. Was I saved? Was I sold? The questions didn't have shapes I could hold yet. All I knew was the man who had said from now on, "You're mine," had made good on every practical promise, and asked me to sign nothing I could not read. That should have made it simple. It didn't. Only time would tell whether the wrong seat had been the worst mistake of my life, or the first right turn after 1,000 wrong ones. Morning came quiet, the townhouse holding the sunlight like it had practiced. Jaime woke first, babbling at the ceiling, legs kicking against the soft blanket until I scooped him close and breathed in the warm, milky scent that had kept me sane for 8 months. For a moment it was just us. No contracts, no keys, no men who moved cities around like chess pieces. A discreet knock. The same woman with architectural hair stood in the doorway. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm Eva. Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Mr. Castellano asked me to remind you the tailor will arrive at 10, the notary at noon, and the officiant at 2. He said..." She paused and her face softened. "He said to tell you there is no rush. Only sequence. Only sequence." The phrase sounded like him. I dressed Jaime in a soft knit set that looked hand-stitched, then looked down at my own suitcase full of Miami clothes that had been clean 10 minutes ago and now looked poor in the cool light. I washed my face, braided my hair, and told my reflection we were doing this because choices were fewer than pride. Downstairs, the dining room was quiet, the table set with understated things that probably cost more than my rent ever had. Luca stood at the window with a phone in his hand, voice low and precise in a language that rolled like velvet and steel. He ended the call when he saw us, and the shift in his expression, slight, real, made something inside me ease. "Good morning," he said. To Jaime he added, with a whisper of a smile, "Buongiorno, piccolo." He took the baby without asking, a formality now, and Jaime went to him with the kind of trust that should have scared me more than it did. Breakfast tasted like permission. Eggs that didn't squeak. Fruit that didn't taste like it had survived 1,000 miles by sheer will. I ate because Eva hovered with a tact that managed not to feel like pressure. Luca didn't comment, didn't push. He talked logistics instead, the day drawn in gentle lines that would hold if I needed them, and flex if I didn't. The tailor arrived at 10 with a rolling case, and the calm of someone who had dressed every shape of hope and regret. He measured without fuss, pinned a simple cream dress that fell like a promise and not a performance, and left with assurances I didn't know how to weigh. 2 hours, he told Eva, and was gone. While Jaime napped, a florist sent something small and white and not lilies. He remembered, I said without meaning to. Eva's mouth did a tiny thing that might have been approval. "He remembers what matters," she said. At noon, papers again, different this time. Not money, not insurance. Names and declarations, a single page that said what the law required to call 2 people one thing instead of 2. The notary was kind, like yesterday's twin. She explained the signatures, pointed to dates, and watched me sign as if she'd seen women at 100 thresholds and learned not to crowd the doorway. At 2, the officiant came. Quiet, secular, experienced in houses like this where grief and change stood shoulder to shoulder. He asked 2 questions to confirm consent, and didn't ask any about love. I looked down at my hands as if they might tell me what I was becoming. Luca stood across from me, no boutonniere, no show. His suit said ceremony because it always did. "Shall we begin?" the officiant asked. I nodded. Luca's gaze found mine, dark and steady. No one said speak now. No one said forever. It felt somehow more honest that way. We said the words the city required. We signed what the city needed. The officiant witnessed. The notary stamped. Eva brought 2 glasses of something pale and celebratory that smelled like apples left in the sun. I touched the rim of mine to Luca's, and he didn't say to us. He said, "To Jaime." I drank because that was the right answer. There was no kiss. We had agreed, explicitly in that folder with clauses and consent, that boundaries would be sacred. When the officiant left and the house exhaled, Luca didn't move toward me. He moved toward the nursery door and looked in on the sleeping child like a man checking the lock on a vault. "Thank you," I said. The words felt insufficient and also too much. "For what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "For the quiet," I said. "For not making this bigger than it is." He nodded once, as if I'd met him in the middle of a negotiation I didn't know I was participating in. "You will be respected in this house," he said simply. "In my world, respect is the floor. We build from there." Afternoon folded itself neatly. Mrs. Vasquez had flown up first thing that morning. Of course she had. I found her in the kitchen like she'd been there all her life, scolding a stock pot that wasn't simmering at the right rate. "I told him you don't need chefs every day," she said, brandishing a spoon like a sword. "You need soup and someone to tell you to nap when your eyes get small." I cried then, quick and humiliating and necessary. She hugged me and said, "It's good to have help, mija. It's not a sin to stop drowning." In the late light, I stood at the tall window with Jaime watching the city change color and wondered what would happen when the sun went down. The house had a night face, I could sense it. A way the walls held voices. A way footsteps were placed. When the knock came, it wasn't delicate. It was coded. 2, pause, 1. Marco. My shoulders unclenched before I could stop them. Luca met him at the foyer. Low voices, a name I didn't know. Then Luca said, "Not today." And whatever it was, wherever it wanted to pull him, he refused. It should have scared me that there were things that could ask. It scared me more that he could tell them no because I was watching. At dinner, the 4 of us sat like a strange, immediate family. Me, Luca, Jaime, and Mrs. Vasquez's soup. Luca asked me about Miami. Not in the way people do when they're making conversation and waiting for their turn to talk, but in a way that mapped my answers and took notes you couldn't see. I let him, because if he was going to claim us, he could at least be forced to know us. After, when the city had settled into its own rhythm and Jaime had given up his last protest against sleep, Luca walked me to the nursery door and stopped as if there were an invisible line he wouldn't cross without invitation. "I will be in my study," he said. "If you need anything, you call this number." He handed me a phone I hadn't noticed before. It was new, unboxed, already set up with a contact list that had 2 names, EVA and Luca. "This number rings me and only me." "You don't sleep?" I asked, too tired to dress the question. "Less than I should," he said. "More than people assume." I nodded, and the quiet between us wasn't empty. "Good night," I said. "Buonanotte," he replied, softer than I'd ever heard him. When I woke at 2 to the baby monitor's rustle, I found a text on the new phone I didn't remember hearing arrive. "If he wakes and wants to walk, the terrace is secure. There is a blanket in the left cabinet." It should have felt invasive. Him knowing our hours, predicting our needs. Instead, it felt like a hand at my back, steadying rather than steering. I told myself I would keep track of when the steadiness became pressure. I told myself I would recognize it, name it, refuse it. We walked the terrace for 15 minutes under a city sky that threw back as much light as it swallowed. Jaime pressed his ear to my collarbone and finally sighed himself into sleep. I stood there after he went heavy, the key pendant cold against his cheek, and didn't know whether the life I had entered was a harbor or a gilded gate. The next days arranged themselves. Paperwork that didn't need me but respected me enough to wait. A pediatrician who met us like we were a regular family, not a new constellation still deciding its gravity. I watched Luca at each juncture. He let me answer questions. He took notes on what mattered to me. When he made a decision, it was decisive and transparent. When he deferred, it was complete, not performative. On the 4th morning, a small box appeared on my nightstand, with a note in that clean, deliberate hand. "For when you want it, not before. L inside." A ring, not the diamond that had blinded the kitchen in Atlanta, but something quieter. A thin band. a stone the color of storm glass. It didn't ask to be worn. It didn't explain itself. I closed the box and put it in the drawer with the same care I gave Jaime's hospital bracelet. I was learning his language. The way he offered. The way he waited. The way he didn't repeat himself. From now on, your mine hadn't turned into locks. It had turned into infrastructure. Roads laid, walls built, doors left open. I didn't know yet if the openness was a test. That evening, as Eva set a single plate at the end of the table for me, because I'd missed lunch and she'd noticed, Luca stepped into the doorway. He looked like a man who had backed 3 fires down to coals and left one burning because it needed to. He held out a file. "Last thing for today," he said. "A trust for Jaime, revocable by you alone. I will contribute, but I do not control it." I took the folder and felt the weight of it settle differently than the others. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. There was a pause, and I recognized it now. The moment he left space for refusal or invitation. "Do you want to sit?" I asked, surprising myself. He did. Not close. Not far. We ate in a quiet that felt earned. When he stood to go, he said, almost as an afterthought, "Tomorrow I will be out for several hours. Marco will remain. If anyone asks for me, no one will. But if they do, you say nothing. You owe no explanations. Is it business?" I asked, aware that the word did too much work. "It is keeping the roof over the rooms where you and he sleep dry," he said. Nothing more poetic than that. I could have asked for details. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered to the part of me that kept watch. "Is it safe? For you?" "Yes." He didn't promise safety for himself, and for the first time I understood the arithmetic he lived by. After he left, I stood at the nursery door and watched Jaime's chest rise and fall, his mouth soft with the labor of dreaming. I pressed my palm to the wood like I could keep out everything we hadn't invited in. The wrong seat had landed us here. A house with a heartbeat. A man who said mine and meant protect. A future that might be a map or a maze. Either way, I was learning the turns. And for tonight, the roof held. The next morning dawned gray. The kind of sky that made the city look washed and waiting. I woke to Jaime babbling against the crib rail, his little fists pounding like he was calling his own roll call. I lifted him, kissed the crease of his neck, and carried him downstairs. The townhouse was quieter than usual. Eva greeted us with coffee and oatmeal, but there was no sense of Luca's presence. His absence was a weight in itself, heavy enough to change the air. "He left early," Eva said, as if she'd read my thoughts. "He said to remind you Marco will remain close. Anything you need, you ask, anything I need." The phrase sounded generous, but also like an invisible fence. I nodded, sat Jaime in the high chair, and let Eva spoon oatmeal into his eager mouth. By late morning, I felt restless. The house was beautiful, yes. Safe, yes. But safety can bruise too, if it leaves no room to stretch. I strapped Jaime into the carrier and stepped onto the terrace. Marco was there, leaning against the opposite building wall, his gaze sweeping the street with professional calm. His head dipped once in acknowledgement. I raised a hand in a half wave, then asked the air, "Do I need permission to walk?" He didn't move, but his voice carried across the space like a wire. "Tell me where you go. That's all. That's all." I wanted to snap back, "That's everything." But I pressed my lips shut, adjusted Jaime's cap, and walked to the corner bodega. The freedom felt staged, like being allowed to run inside a circle. Still, the fresh air on my face made my lungs loosen. Jaime giggled at the pigeons, chasing their shadows with his fingers. When I came back, Marco was still where I'd left him. "Thank you," I said, surprising both of us. He inclined his head again. No more, no less. That evening, Luca returned. Not loud, not late, but with a quiet that hummed under his skin. Jaime crawled to him the moment he appeared, as if pulled by gravity. Luca crouched, gathered him, and held him against his chest like he'd been gone for years, not hours. "Good day?" I asked carefully, Spoon paused halfway to my lips. Necessary, he said. His gaze flicked to me, steady. No harm touched you? It wasn't a question as much as an accounting. No, I said. Marco made sure. At that, his shoulders eased slightly. Good. We ate in silence, but it wasn't empty. After, when Jaime slept, and the house folded into its night rhythm, Luca poured himself a glass of something amber and leaned against the mantel. I sat across from him, the key pendant cool against my collarbone. Your world, I said finally. You said it keeps the roof dry. What does that mean, really? His eyes stayed on the glass, then lifted to mine. It means there are storms, and I am the wall they break against. And if one breaks through, his mouth shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile, then the wall learns to be higher. It was an answer, but not the one I wanted. Still, I let it stand, because asking again felt like pressing a bruise. Days blurred into a rhythm. Jaime woke, laughed, learned to clap. Ava fed us. Marco shadowed us. Luca moved between presence and absence like a tide. Some nights he ate with us. Some nights he vanished into his study with calls that stretched past midnight. Each time he left, I wondered if he'd come back. Each time he did, the relief in my chest betrayed me. One afternoon, while folding Jaime's laundry, I found something tucked at the bottom of a drawer. A silver rattle, heavy and old, engraved with initials I didn't recognize. I turned it over in my hand until Luca's voice came from the doorway. It was my brother's, he said quietly. I startled, almost dropping it. I didn't mean... It's fine. He crossed the room, took the rattle gently, and set it back in the drawer. He died before I was born. My mother kept it. I keep it. The weight in his tone made me swallow my apology. And you put it in Jaime's drawer? His gaze was unreadable. It belongs to a child who should grow. Possession again. Protection again. My heart pressed hard against my ribs. That night I dreamt of storms slamming against walls, and a child's laughter echoing in unfamiliar rooms. The following morning, a newspaper slid under the door. Headlines blared words I tried not to connect. Syndicate, altercation, 3 dead. I folded it too quickly, shoved it into the recycling bin, but the echo lingered. When Luca came down, tie already loosened, I asked before I could stop myself. Was it you? He stopped, turned, and looked at me with a gaze that made the air thin. If it were, would you want to know? My throat tightened. Yes. He set the paper on the table, tapped the folded corner. No. The word was final, a slammed door. But then softer. You will know what concerns you, not what endangers you. That night, when I put Jaime to sleep, I lingered longer than usual, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering what parts of truth I'd signed away. The days that followed were gentler. Luca took us to the park at dawn when the city was still wiping sleep from its eyes. He pushed Jaime's stroller with one hand, his other in his pocket, looking more like a father than a man people feared. Parents glanced, whispered, looked away quickly. He doesn't care, I whispered, leaning close. He shouldn't, Luca said. His gaze scanned the skyline like he was memorizing threats. But he will. One day. The words chilled me, even as Jaime clapped at pigeons like the world was nothing but feathers and sky. Back at the townhouse, a package waited. Toys, clothes, books, all unopened, all precise. I frowned at the stack. This is too much. It is not enough, Luca said simply. Do you even know what enough looks like? I asked, sharper than I meant. He paused, then looked at me with a quiet that felt old. Not anymore. That answer silenced me more than shouting would have. Later, as Jaime slept, I sat on the terrace with the city below and the key pendant heavy at my throat. I thought of my mother's voice, rasping with insistence. Promise me you'll give him better. Was this better? The door slid open behind me. Luca stepped out, hands in his pockets. Gaze on me like I was a question he'd been rehearsing. You're unhappy, he said. Not asked, stated. I'm uncertain, I admitted. This feels like someone else's life. He nodded slowly. Then make it yours. Change what you want. Nothing here is untouchable except your safety. My safety, I echoed. Or your control. His eyes darkened. The two are not always different. The honesty rattled me. I looked away first. Inside, Jaime stirred in his crib. A small sound. A tether. I went to him, brushed his hair back, whispered, I've got you. But I couldn't tell if the words were a promise to him or to myself. The next morning, I decided to test the edges he'd offered me. I want to take Jaime out, I told Eva over coffee. Not the park. A walk, a cafe, somewhere that doesn't smell like polished wood and quiet money. Eva's eyes flicked toward the hallway, where footsteps meant Marco was a fact, not a person. Tell him where, she said gently. He will adapt. Does he adapt, I asked, or does the world adapt around him? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I strapped Jaime into the stroller and texted the number Luca had given me, taking him to a cafe on Lexington. Back in an hour. The reply was immediate. Marco is with you. Of course he was. When we turned the first corner, he was a shadow reflected in storefront glass, a fixed star I could measure distance by. I told myself the air felt good on my face because of weather, not permission. The cafe was small and crowded in the New York way that makes you feel less alone. I folded the stroller near the table, ordered an iced coffee, and gave Jaime a rice puff he treated like treasure. For 10 minutes, I let myself pretend we were just a mother and her boy in a city big enough to forget us. A man in a rumpled blazer stopped by our table. Cute kid, he said, smile easy. Thanks, I answered, aiming for polite and closed. His gaze slid to the stroller, to me, then past my shoulder toward the street. You live in the brownstone with the blue door? My fingers tightened around the cup. No. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Listen. You don't know what you... He didn't finish. Marco appeared without sound, one hand settling lightly, professionally on the man's elbow. Sir, he said, a warning wrapped in civility. Your coffee is waiting at the counter. The man glanced at Marco, then at me, some calculation changing behind his eyes. Sure, he said too loudly, stepping back with a smile that was all teeth. He walked away. He didn't get coffee, he left. I exhaled in a rush I hadn't noticed I was holding. Was that necessary? I asked Marco, keeping my voice low so I didn't wake Jaime. Yes, he said simply. On the walk back, the city felt sharper, outlines inked in thicker lines. In the townhouse foyer, I unbuckled Jaime with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Luca was waiting in the library, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the knot in his jaw visible before he spoke. Why did you engage? He asked, voice quiet in a way that made it worse. I didn't. He spoke to me. Then you disengage. He took a step closer, stopped himself. If someone approaches, you move. You leave. You text me. Heat flared in my chest. I can't live like a ghost, Luca. People talk. In cities, people talk. In my world, people do more than talk, he said, and the line came out so flat I felt the drop in my stomach like an elevator descending. He scrubbed a hand over his face, then forced air out through his nose. I will make it easier. For me, I said, or for you? For both, he said, and left before I could argue. That afternoon, a woman with watchful eyes and a sensible ponytail arrived at the townhouse. She wore dark trousers, clean sneakers, no jewelry. She looked like every other nanny and none of them. Ellie, she said, offering a hand I took before I could decide not to. I'm Lara. I head the protective team when Mr. Castellano isn't available. I'll be your shadow when you want to move more freely. Protective team, I repeated, like a movie. Less interesting than movies, she said. More boring. If we're doing it right, you get to forget we're there. I looked at her, at the kindness that had been polished into competence. Can you be invisible inside my life? No, she said, honest enough to win me. But I can be quiet. With Lara, freedom felt less like a fence. She let me choose the route, the cafe, the bench in the sun. She stood where she could see reflections. She liked Jaime immediately, which was an advantage in the economy of my trust. When he grabbed her finger with sticky authority, she laughed like a person, not a professional. Days fell into a pattern I could chart. Mornings with Eva's calm, middays with Lara's perimeter, dusk with Luca if it didn't belong to the world that paid him. We learned each other's edges. I cooked once badly. He ate it like a man who'd made fewer promises and broken none of them. I rearranged the nursery. He said nothing, but the next day the dimmer switch was lower, the nightlight warmer, as if the house had nodded yes. For a while the seams held. Then the note appeared. It was small, tucked beneath the stroller's strap when we came back from the pediatrician. White, unremarkable, folded twice. My name wasn't on it. My hands knew better and opened it anyway. Wrong seat wasn't a mistake. I stared at the 5 words until they stopped being words and turned into weather. Lara's shadow fell across the paper before her voice did. May I? She asked. I handed it over. She read once, twice, then lifted her gaze to mine. Who saw you take it? No one, I whispered, the truth feeling like a lie I'd told myself. We were careful. She nodded, already moving through quiet procedures I couldn't see. Upstairs, she said. Now. In the library, Luca listened without interruption, as Lara laid the note on his desk. When she finished, he didn't touch it. He didn't move for a beat that stretched. Then he said, "Burn it." Lara lifted a brow. "Forensics?" "Later," he said. "This is theater. We don't give the theater an audience." She took the note and left like a soldier. "It could be a stupid prank," I said, hearing how thin it sounded. "It could be," he agreed, and the agreement offered no comfort. He stood, came around the desk, and stopped with his palms braced on the wood like he needed the room to hold him. "Where did you go?" "From door to door," I told him. "Every corner, every light, every stop I remembered, and a few I might have imagined." When I finished, he was very still. "Nothing changes," he said finally, surprising me. "You do not lose freedom because someone wants you to feel hunted. You will go where you wish. You will tell us. We will make it safe." Anger and relief hit at the same time. "You can't guarantee that." "No," he said. "I can't." We sat in that truth for a while, 2 people who had built a house on it and were still startled by the draft. That night, after Jaime fell into the heavy sleep of a child who had conquered the day, Luca stood in the doorway to the nursery, watching the rise and fall of a small rib cage protected by walls and wishes. "I will not put you in a box," he said without looking at me. "I refuse cages, even gilded ones." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "A refusal?" "It's a design," he said. "Doors that lock from the inside, windows that open, lines that blur when you need them to." "You're describing a maze," I said quietly. He turned then, the corner of his mouth almost soft. "Only if you forget you have the map." The next days were measured in small defiance. I took the subway one stop with Lara's disapproval a temperature and not a word. I bought secondhand books for Jaime and mailed one to Lisa with a note that didn't explain enough. I made a doctor's appointment for myself because my body had become a thing I managed around survival, and now it asked for more. When I came home from that appointment, there were flowers on the hall table. Not lilies, not daisies. Wild things that looked like they'd tried to grow between sidewalk cracks and been given a vase instead. The note was simple. "You don't have to ask for permission to be well." Eli stared at it until my eyes blurred and then laughed at myself, because joy felt like something I needed to practice. That evening he was late. The study lights stayed on past midnight. I fell asleep in the rocking chair with Jaime heavy across my legs and woke to a blanket I hadn't fetched. In the morning, the newspaper had a different headline. Deal averts. Violence. The words were a bandage on a wound I hadn't seen. Luca came down with shadows under his eyes and a voice that sounded scraped. He poured coffee and didn't drink it. "You look like a man who wrestled a storm," I said. "It wrestled back," he said, and for once the smile made it all the way to his eyes. He reached for the mug, reconsidered, then looked at me as if choosing the word. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying. I hadn't said I would. I hadn't said I wouldn't. But in that moment, with the city catching light on the edges and Jaime reaching toward him with fists that believed in gravity and fathers, I realized I was no longer standing at the door. I was somewhere inside the room, learning where the windows were. Later, while Jaime napped and Ava hummed an old song that might have been a prayer, I opened the drawer and took out the smaller ring, the one that didn't ask, the one that waited. I didn't put it on. I set it on the table where I could see it from the chair, and let it be a question I wasn't afraid of anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number that somehow I recognized. "Stop pretending this is love." I stared at it until Lara's shadow found me again. "Block it?" she asked. "No," I said, surprising both of us. "Save it, it's a reminder." "Of what?" "That love isn't the only reason people choose a life," I said. "Sometimes safety is a feeling first. Sometimes it becomes a fact." Lara studied me, nodded once, and slipped back into the quiet. That night, Luca stood at the terrace rail with the city breathing below us. "The note was handled," he said. "The text will be traced. Will you tell me who?" I asked. "If it concerns you," he said. "And if it endangers me?" I pressed. "Then you will know," he said. And for the first time, I believed the difference mattered. I turned the small ring on the table with one finger. "Do doors that lock from the inside come with keys?" He glanced at the pendant at my throat, then back at my face. "They do now." The wrong seat had started a story that might have been a warning. In the quiet between his words and mine, in the space between protection and possession, I felt something like a beginning choose us back. The next morning arrived in pieces, a clatter from the kitchen, Jaime's babble, the city coughing itself awake. I carried my son to the window and let him pat the glass while taxis stitched yellow lines onto wet pavement. Behind me, the new phone lit with a message from a number I knew now. Trace confirmed. "Noise, not fire. You're safe." Noise, not fire. I wanted to let the words settle like a blanket, but noise can still make you flinch. I set the phone down and pressed my lips to the top of Jaime's head. He smelled like sleep and soap and the kind of clean that isn't about money. Ava had made pancakes with edges the color of old books. "Eat," she said, sliding a plate toward me. "You think better when your blood sugar behaves." "I've been thinking anyway," I said. "Then you'll be dangerous when you're fed." She winked, as if this were a plan we had made together. Luca didn't appear at breakfast. The house carried his absence like a note held under a thumb, muted but humming. I told myself I was fine with that. I told myself I preferred it, because decisions are easier when the person they concern isn't looking at you like you're gravity. Mid-morning, Lara arrived with her small, practical smile. "Walk?" she asked. "Not today," I said. "Errand." Her eyebrows lifted. "Where?" "Somewhere that belongs to me." I held up a folded paper with an address in my handwriting. A storage unit I had rented in Miami when my life was a box that didn't fit inside the apartment. The company offered national access. I'd checked. I could retrieve the contents here. Lara studied the paper, then nodded. "Fine. We'll bring the car around." "It's just documents," I added, suddenly needing to justify. "Certificates. Birth things. A picture that's the only copy of anything." "You don't owe me reasons," she said, already moving. "You owe me a time of departure." The unit smelled like cardboard and old dust, and when the door rolled up, The low metal rattle echoed like a cough. Inside, one trunk, one plastic bin, and the history of a person I had almost forgotten to carry forward. Lara stood back while I knelt and sorted. My mother's handwriting on envelopes. I traced the loops like a prayer. A photograph of me at 16 in a thrifted prom dress that tried too hard. Jaime's tiny hospital cap in a Ziploc. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a towel, I found something I didn't remember packing. A tin with a cracked lid. Inside, neatly folded in a plastic sleeve, was a letter with no envelope. The paper had been refolded so many times the creases were pale and tired. The handwriting was precise. Masculine. Eleanor. If you're reading this, it means my lawyer followed instructions, and you're old enough to read without your mother editing the world. I know what she told you, and some of it is true. The rest is what she needed to survive. You are mine in the way a decision is mine. I made it. I will own it. If you want nothing from me but a name on a certificate, take it. If you want more, come find me. AC. The initials rang in my ribs like a struck bell. AC. The letters were a shape I knew without wanting to. I had asked my mother once at 12 who my father was. She'd said the name in a way that made it sound like a threat and a dare both. Alessandro Castellano. The world tilted. AC became LC on my tongue, and I felt the floor of the storage unit lurch. Lara's voice found me through the blood rush in my ears. "Ellie?" she asked, softer than I'd ever heard her. "You're white." I folded the letter, put it back in the tin, and closed the lid with a click that felt too loud. "I'm okay," I lied. "Just old ghosts." "Ghosts don't kill you," she said, helping me stand. "Tripping over them when you don't look where you're going does." She didn't ask to see the letter. She didn't tell me to show it to him. She simply put a hand under my elbow until the room steadied. Back at the townhouse, I tucked the tin into the bottom drawer of my nightstand and shut the wood on the thrum in my veins. Then I sat on the bed and stared at the key around my neck like it might unlock answers I hadn't asked for. He found me in the afternoon, a shadow lengthening through the doorway before his voice arrived. "You went out," he said, not accusing, not neutral. "Lara said you retrieved documents." "I did." He waited. He had learned patience as a weapon and as a mercy. "Anything you need my help with?" he asked finally. "No," I said. And then, because the truth weighed more when you divided it, "Yes. Maybe." "What is it?" His tone didn't change, but the room did. Smaller, closer. I stood, walked past him to the window because distance felt like oxygen. "My father," I said to the glass. I found a letter. Silence became a canvas. His steps didn't sound when he crossed the room. When he spoke, it was behind me, close, a warmth at my back that wasn't touch. "From?" "Alessandro Castellano." I turned then because the name had to be looked at. AC. The shift in him was almost invisible, like a wire pulled tight, like a gun cocked in a pocket. His face didn't change, but the color in the room did. "Your mother told you?" "She told me a name once," I said. I didn't believe it. Believing made it real and unreal at the same time. "I need to see the letter," he said, and the need wasn't about paper. I went to the drawer, took out the tin, and handed him the folded page. He read it quickly, then again slower, as if the spaces between words might confess. When he finished, he held the paper like it could bleed. "He was my father," he said, the words flat but steady. "By blood, by law, not by anything that mattered." The air went thinner. "You knew he—" "Yes," Luca said, cutting cleanly through the tangle. I knew he was a man who had other lives, other rooms he kept his names in. He refolded the letter and placed it on the nightstand like an offering. "If what you are asking is whether this makes you more mine, the answer is that it changes nothing. If what you are asking is whether this makes you less free, the answer is also nothing. Blood is logistics. Choice is architecture. I sat down because my knees were tired of pretending. He said, "If you want more, come find me." "He's dead," Lucas said without ceremony. "He cannot be found or forgiven." "What about the wanting?" I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had softened into something that made my throat ache. "Wanting a father is not a sin. Mistaking a man for one when he is a producer of coins and consequences is the only mistake you can still avoid." "Is that what you are?" I asked, not to hurt but to measure. "A producer of coins and consequences?" "Yes," he said, and something like relief moved through me because it was the only answer I could trust. "And a man who learned to be a wall when doors failed." He left me with the letter in the shape of a choice I hadn't known I was making. I put the paper back in the tin back in the drawer, and lay down beside my sleeping son, because some decisions require horizontal thinking. When I woke, the sky had turned the color of low fruit. A text waited. Terrace. Lie went. He stood at the rail with the city in his hands. He didn't turn when I stepped out. He knew I was there like houses know their inhabitants. I stood beside him and let the night find my eyes. "Tell me what staying looks like," I said, because the question had grown teeth and wanted feeding. "Staying looks like rooms that remember your footsteps," he said. "Doctors who answer your calls at midnight. Schools that know his name because his mother wore out 2 pairs of shoes to make sure he got there." "And leaving?" "Leaving looks like a woman who can breathe without asking permission from her own lungs," he said. "A boy who learns his mother is a country and he is a citizen, not a possession." The words trembled the railing under my hands. "You just argued for both." "I argued for Jamie," he said. "The argument for you is the one you write." I turned to him then, because some decisions needed a face to throw themselves against. "If I leave, will you make it hard?" "No," he met my gaze unblinking. "I will make it safe. For both of you. I will be noise, not fire. I will be a wall you don't see, not a door you cannot open. And if I stay, then we will learn to share oxygen," he said, a ghost of something like humor in the word. "I will not cut your air to keep you close." I laughed, a small, surprised sound. "Is that a vow?" "It's a design," he said again. "I prefer designs to vows." I thought of my mother, of the motel rooms we had memorized to avoid rent collectors, of the promises she had made that were really prayers. I thought of the wrong seat, the way a single mistake had turned into a map. I thought of a letter from a dead man and a living one who told me the truth even when it cheapened him. "I want to try staying," I said, and the wanting landed with more mercy than I expected. "But I won't call it love to make it look prettier." "I won't ask you to," he said. "Then we're agreed." The pendant was cool at my throat. I pressed it between thumb and forefinger until it warmed. "We stay. We build." He nodded once, the kind of nod that moves money and men. "We build." He didn't reach for me. He didn't step closer. He stood like a wall that had learned not to lean. The city breathed. Somewhere downstairs, Eva laughed at something on the radio. Inside my chest, a flock of birds that had been flying for months finally landed. Later, after Jaime was fed and the dishwasher hummed like a distant engine, I took the smaller ring from the drawer and slipped it onto a chain. Not on my finger, not yet. I let it rest beside the key-like punctuation at the end of a clear sentence. As I turned off the nursery light, my phone buzzed. A new number, no name. "You chose a cage." I didn't show it to Luca. I didn't show it to Lara. I stood in the doorway and watched my son sleep, then typed a reply I didn't send. Cages don't come with keys. I deleted the draft and slipped the phone into my pocket. Not everything needed to be said to be true. Not everything true needed to be said aloud. When I lay down, the house felt like a ship that had set a course. The wrong seat was a port we'd left. The ocean ahead was negotiated by weather and will. I closed my eyes and let the hull carry us. In the morning, decisions would be bricks. Tonight, they were breath. Morning slid into the townhouse like a blade of light under a door. Jaime woke first, babbling, a sound more sure of itself these days. He crawled to the edge of the crib and stood, gripping the bars with pudgy hands, triumphant. I scooped him up, pressing my nose into his hair, inhaling a smell that had become a landmark. Baby shampoo and something indefinably his. Downstairs, Eva was already at the stove. She didn't comment on the dark circles under my eyes, didn't ask about the phone I'd clutched until dawn. She just poured coffee and pushed a plate toward me. "Eat," she said. "Even walls need mortar." Luca appeared a few minutes later, jacket over one arm, shirt sleeves rolled. His hair was damp from the shower, his eyes a color I hadn't learned yet. He looked at me for a long moment, something weighing behind his gaze. Then he bent and touched a hand lightly to Jaime's back. "Buongiorno, piccolo," he murmured. "Ready for your tour?" "Tour?" I asked. He straightened, smile small but real. "You said you wanted to build. Today we look at what that means." I followed him out to the SUV, because saying no would have meant staying in the cage the text had accused me of. Lara sat in the front seat, tablet balanced on her knees, her face neutral but eyes alert. Marco drove, hand steady on the wheel. We crossed into a different part of Manhattan, narrower streets lined with brownstones whose windows wore flower boxes instead of security grates. Luca gestured out the window. "Properties," he said. "Restaurants, spaces, all legitimate. All names you could read on a tax return." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because you asked what staying looked like," he said. "This is part of it. Visibility without vulnerability. The places we can stand in the light." We stopped at a small corner building with a chalkboard sign and the smell of espresso spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, the staff greeted him without flinch or flourish, like he was both owner and customer but not a king. He introduced me by my first name only. "She'll be around," he said. "Treat her as you treat me." The barista smiled at Jaime, handing him a tiny paper cup filled with warm milk. He cooed as if this was the best gift of his life. I sat at a table near the window looking out at the street. "This is one of yours?" "One of ours," Luca corrected. "If you stay, you will have a voice in how these things move, where the money goes, which schools it builds, which kitchens it feeds. You're telling me I'd be a partner?" The word felt strange in my mouth. "I'm telling you you'd be part of the architecture," he said. "Not a guest." He left me to wander the cafe. The staff spoke Italian and English interchangeably, moving around each other with the practiced choreography of a place that had survived storms. On one wall hung a photograph of a boy about Jaime's age, dark curls, wide eyes. The caption read simply, "Per Matteo." The sight of it made my chest tighten. I turned back to find Luca watching me. "My brother's son," he said quietly, answering the question I hadn't asked. "He didn't make it." I touched the edge of the photo lightly. "You built this for him?" "For everyone after him," Luca said. "For the ones who come next." Back in the SUV, Jaime fell asleep against my chest, lulled by movement and milk. Luca sat across from me, elbows on his knees, eyes on his hands. "You understand now why I offered," he said finally. "I understand the offer," I said. "I don't know if I understand you." He gave a small, almost self-mocking smile. "Neither do I, some days." That night, after Jaime was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the trust documents and a pen. I wrote notes in the margins, questions about clauses, requests for clarifications. When I finished, I slid the pages into a folder and set it on the counter. Luca came in quietly, poured himself water, and saw the folder. "You read it," he said. "I did," I said, and I wrote back. He opened it, scanned the notes, and one corner of his mouth lifted. "Good. You're not angry?" I asked. "Angry?" His brow furrowed, genuinely puzzled. "For what?" "For questioning." Questioning is building, he said simply. Blind trust is demolition. The answer knocked something loose inside me. I still don't know if this is a cage, I admitted, but I'm learning the shape of the key. Good, he said again, and for the first time, the word felt like a bridge instead of a verdict. Days began to stretch differently after that. Luca made time to show me ledgers. Not just the numbers, but the maps of how they became meals, scholarships, renovations. You don't have to take this on, he told me. But if you want it, it's here. I surprised myself by wanting it. Not the power, but the function. The chance to make decisions that weren't only about survival. The ability to say yes and have the world move accordingly. Not because of fear, but because of structure. It was terrifying, but it was also intoxicating. One evening, as dusk bled into the kitchen, I asked, "If I decided to leave tomorrow, would you still build these things?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, "because they matter without you." "And with me?" "With you, they matter more," he said, his voice soft enough to be dangerous. The text messages stopped for a while. No more anonymous warnings. No more accusations of cages. Instead, postcards began arriving at the townhouse. Blank on the back, except for a single printed word. Run. Ava found one tucked under a bouquet. Lara intercepted another at the security gate. She showed it to me without comment, then shredded it. "Whoever it is," she said, "they're trying to get in your head. Stay in your body." I nodded, but the postcard seeded small, thorny thoughts. What did they know? What did they want me to believe? At night, I lay awake listening to Jaime's breath, Luca's low voice in another room, the city whispering through the windows. One night, unable to stand the weight of my own questions, I went to his study. He looked up from a spread of papers, eyes clear despite the hour. "Yes?" he asked. I held up the latest postcard. "Who is this?" He took it, glanced at it, and set it down like a fly he'd already swatted. "Noise," he said. "Not fire." "Noise can still drive people mad," I said. "It won't," he said, his voice quiet but edged. "Not you. Not if you remember which sounds belong to which room." I leaned against the doorframe, exhausted. I don't know how to live in a house where someone else names the rooms. "Then rename them," he said. And the softness in his tone startled me. "Tell me what you want them to be." I stared at him, at the man who had said from now on, "You're mine," and now offered me the pen to write the map. "Maybe that's the beginning," I said. "Renaming." "Begin," he said, and turned back to his papers like the matter had been settled. Upstairs, in the nursery, Jaime stirred and rolled onto his back, his tiny hand reaching into the empty air. I took his hand and whispered, "We're beginning." He gripped my finger and drifted back to sleep as if the word was enough. When I finally lay down, the key pendant pressed a small circle into my skin, a mark that might have been a bruise or a blessing. In the dark, the house shifted, a ship at sea, carrying us toward a horizon I hadn't yet named. The next morning, I woke with a decision that felt less like courage and more like necessity. For days, I had walked through a house that moved around me like choreography. Doors opened, meals appeared, shadows shifted at the corners to keep me safe. But safety, I realized, wasn't enough. If I was staying, if I was building, then something had to carry my fingerprints. At breakfast, I pushed the folder of trust documents aside and cleared my throat. "The neighborhood school on 87th Street, I said. "It needs repairs. Leaks in the ceiling, old wiring. I read about it in the paper." Luca paused with his coffee halfway to his mouth. His gaze lifted, heavy and unreadable. And I want to fund them," I said. "From the trust, my money, not yours." The silence that followed was long enough for Eva to retreat into the kitchen with the plates. Jaime smacked the high chair tray with his palms, breaking the spell. Finally, Luca set down his cup. "Do it. Just like that?" I asked. not sure if it was a test or a trap. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. I said it was yours. Not a word leaves this house without weight. If this is what you want, then it's done. It sounded too easy. But within hours, Laura had arranged a meeting with the principal. I walked into the tired brick building with Jaime on my hip and a file under my arm. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Children's artwork peeled from the walls. A secretary with tired eyes showed me to an office where the principal, a woman with streaked hair and a wrinkled suit, sat behind a desk piled high with forms. "You're here on behalf of Mr. Castellano?" she asked, wary. "No," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I'm here on behalf of myself. I have a son. I want schools like this to be places he could belong." Her eyes softened. "What exactly are you offering?" "Repairs, wiring, safe classrooms." I opened the file. "Not charity. A commitment." She looked at the papers, then at me. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she reached across the desk and gripped my hand. "Do you know how many promises I've heard? Do you know how many fell through?" "This one won't," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my own voice. By the time I left, contractors were scheduled. Budgets were signed. Laura held the door for me without comment, but her glance carried something that looked like respect. Back at the townhouse, Eva fussed with the stroller straps as if she'd been waiting to scold me for hours. "You're tired," she said. "Sit before you fall." I obeyed because she was right. Luca appeared a few minutes later, jacket still on, expression unreadable. "I heard," he said. "You said it was mine to use," I reminded him. "I did." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "There will be whispers now. People will test whether your decisions carry my weight. They will wonder if your voice is your own or mine in disguise." "Let them wonder," I said. He studied me for a long beat, then nodded. "So be it." The whispers came sooner than I expected. That evening, while Luca was upstairs on a call, a man arrived at the door. Slick hair, heavy ring, smile sharp enough to cut. Eva intercepted him, but his voice carried. "I came to congratulate the lady," he said. "Big moves, writing checks like that." I stepped into the foyer before Eva could block me. "Who are you?" He bowed his head mockingly. "An associate. I wanted to meet the new architect of generosity. Perhaps next you'll be choosing which restaurants we open, eh?" His tone made the words less joke and more challenge. Marco appeared at my shoulder without a sound. The man smirked, tipped his hat, and left with a swagger that felt rehearsed. When the door shut, Marco's jaw was tight. He shouldn't have come. "Who was he?" I asked. "Noise," Marco said, echoing Luca's word. But the tension in his shoulders told me Noise could still hurt. Later, Luca found me in the nursery, rocking Jaime while the mobile spun stars above his head. "You shouldn't have answered the door," he said. "I didn't want to hide," I answered. He crossed the room, kneeling until his eyes were level with mine. "You don't hide, but you choose your battles. That man doesn't deserve your words." "I don't want to be protected by silence," I said, louder than I meant. Jaime stirred but didn't wake. Luca's gaze darkened, but not with anger. "Then speak," he said, "and I will make the world listen." It sounded like both promise and threat. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with Jaime's soft breathing in the monitor, and the tin with the letter from Alessandro still in the drawer. AC to L, C to me. Choices layered like sediment. The phone buzzed. Another message from the number that had told me to run. "He'll use you to clean his name." "That's all." I didn't reply. I stared at the words until they blurred, then put the phone face down. In the morning, Luca slid into the seat across from me at breakfast. "There are people who will try to define you by me," he said. "And people who will try to define me by you. Both will be wrong." "Will they?" I asked softly. "Yes." He reached across the table, not for my hand but for Jaime's, steadying the boy as he tried to stand on the chair. because you took the wrong seat once. And now the seat belongs to you." Jaime laughed, oblivious. Ava wiped her eyes with a dish towel like she'd seen something worth remembering. For the first time since the plane, since the claim, since the cage accusations, I felt the ground beneath me stop shifting. I didn't know if it was love. I didn't know if it was safety. But I knew it was mine. The first sign that my decision had rippled beyond paperwork was subtle. Eva came back from the market with a frown she didn't wear. "People were asking," she said, setting down the bags. "Not about Mr. Castellano, about you, about the school." I forced a laugh. "What could they possibly want from me?" "Credit," she said. "Or blame. Both weigh the same." By noon, the contractors had started at the school. Photos appeared on social media. Scaffolding going up, wiring ripped out, walls being painted. I liked one quietly from an anonymous account. Within an hour, a comment appeared under it. A good mother shouldn't gamble with her son's safety. I stared at the words until they went blurry. When I looked up, Laura was already watching me from across the room. She didn't ask for the phone. She didn't need to. "Noise?" I asked, my voice small. "Not yet," she said, "but listen to the pitch. Noise at that frequency can break glass." That evening, Luca came home earlier than usual. His tie was gone, his jaw tight. He didn't speak until Eva carried Jaime upstairs for a bath. Then he set a thin file on the table in front of me. "They're trying to see if you bleed," he said. "An article will run tomorrow. It will say the donation was a cover, that you're a front for laundering." My stomach turned. I used my own account. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Perception eats facts for breakfast." I pressed my palms flat on the table to steady them. "I'm not hiding." "You won't," he said. "But you will have company." He glanced toward the door. "Lara will double the team. Marco will be closer. No changes to your routine. That shows strength." "Strength," I echoed. "Or a cage." He met my gaze. "A fortress, Ellie. One you can open from the inside. That's the difference." The next day began normally enough. Jaime spilled oatmeal. Ava scolded gently. The city hummed. But as I wheeled the stroller out for a walk, 2 men stepped from a parked van. They didn't block me, just fell into step on either side, smiles fixed. "Congratulations," one said. "Big patron now, huh?" "I'm sorry, do I know you?" I asked, my pulse spiking. "Not yet," the other said. "But we'd like to. Talk about how decisions get made." Lara materialized between us, her hand light on my elbow. "She has nothing to say," she said, voice calm. "She's been saying plenty with her checkbook," the first man said, grin widening. "Mr. Castellano know you're playing Civic Angel?" "She's done," Lara said. Her tone shifted from polite to something else. "Step back." They didn't. Jaime whimpered. My throat closed. Then a black sedan pulled to the curb with the quiet of something inevitable. Marco stepped out, posture loose but eyes hard. "Gentlemen," he said, as if greeting old friends. "You're standing in the wrong street." The men hesitated. Something passed between them and Marco, a language of glances and muscle memory. Then they backed away, hands raised in mock surrender. "We're just saying hi," one called. "No harm." They climbed back into the van and drove off. I exhaled so hard my knees shook. Lara guided me into the sedan. Marco shut the door and got behind the wheel. "Back home," he said. In the back seat, I clutched Jaime to my chest, his small heart hammering against mine. "They knew my name," I whispered. "They knew you're not afraid to write one," Lara said quietly. When we reached the townhouse, Luca was waiting in the foyer. He took one look at my face and crossed the space in 2 strides, his hands hovering but not touching. "You're both unhurt?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Thanks to them." He nodded to Lara and Marco. "Go," he said. "I'll call you." They vanished like shadows at dusk. Then he turned back to me. "This is what happens when you put your hands on the world," he said. "It puts its hands back. I wanted to help a school, I said, my voice breaking. Not start a war. This isn't war, he said softly. This is the first push on a door that doesn't like to open. I sat on the bottom step, Jaime clinging to my shirt, tears blurring my vision. Tell me it was worth it. It will be, he said, kneeling until his eyes were level with mine. But you don't have to stand alone to make it so. I shook my head. I don't know if I can do this. He reached out slowly, palm up between us. Then let me teach you how to hold a door without letting it crush you. I didn't take his hand. Not yet. But I didn't stand up and run either. That night, after Jaime slept, I found myself on the terrace again. The city below glittered like spilled glass. Luca joined me, leaning on the rail, a silhouette against the skyline. They'll keep testing, he said. Noise, whispers, maybe more. It won't stop until they know what you're made of. I'm not made of steel, I said. No, he agreed. You're made of something better. You bend. Steel breaks. Silence stretched, softer this time. I turned to him. If they come for Jaime, they won't, he said, voice a low certainty. Because they know what I'll do, and because now they've seen what you'll do. What I'll do? I asked, startled. You didn't hide today, he said. You stood. They noticed. That matters. A gust lifted the edge of his shirt, the key pendant around my neck glinting in the dim light like a signal. I touched it, feeling its weight, and wondered if I was still carrying a cage, or if I'd begun to shape a key. Luca's voice broke the quiet. This is the life you stepped into when you took the wrong seat, he said. But it doesn't have to own you. You can own it. And if I can't, I whispered. Then I'll hold the door until you can, he said, turning to meet my eyes. But you don't get to walk back through pretending you never touched it. Below us, the city kept breathing. Inside, Jaime dreamed. And above, for the first time since Miami, I felt the strange certainty of a horizon forming. A cliff or a bridge, I couldn't tell which. But ours to reach all the same. The next morning began deceptively quiet. Jaime sat in his high chair, smearing banana across his tray with the joy of a boy who believed in mess. Ava hummed while rinsing dishes. From the outside, it looked like any other morning. But underneath, the air felt charged, like a wire humming before it sparks. I couldn't stop replaying the encounter, the men who knew my name, the grin that said they wanted to test me. Noise, Luca had called it. But noise carried echo. When Luca came down, his tie already loosened, his gaze landed on me before it did on anything else. You didn't sleep, he said. I couldn't, I admitted. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices. You stood, he said simply, as though that balanced the scales. I don't want to just stand, I said. I don't want to wait for them to push again. His head tilted slightly. Then what do you want? I surprised myself with the answer. I want to choose where we stand, not wait for them to pick the ground. For a long moment he was silent, as if measuring the shape of my words. Then he nodded once. Then you need information. Knowledge is ground. By afternoon, Laura was driving me through parts of the city I had only ever passed on the subway. Blocks where scaffolding hugged buildings like bandages, where kids played soccer in cracked lots, where grocery stores kept everything behind glass. These are the places, she said, voice low. The ones people like to forget until elections. The ones men like those yesterday use for leverage. I pressed Jaime's stroller tighter against me. And you're showing me because? Because you asked, she said simply, and because he told me to. We stopped at a community center that smelled of chalk and sweat. The director, a woman with short gray hair and a voice like gravel, welcomed us with wary eyes. Castellano sent you? No, I corrected. I came myself. I heard you need books, computers. She barked a laugh. We need the ceiling not to cave in, but sure, computers too. Her bluntness made me smile despite myself. Then maybe both. We walked through cracked hallways where posters peeled from the walls. Kids crowded into one room with 3 broken laptops. The director crossed her arms. Why would you care? I adjusted Jaime on my hip. Because my son will grow up in this city. Because if I have a voice, I want it to echo in rooms like this. For a second, her eyes softened. Then she nodded once. If you're serious, come back in a week. If you're gone by then, I'll know you were just another name with a checkbook. Back in the car, I felt lighter and heavier at once. Laura didn't comment until we were nearly home. You know, she said, you're painting a target on yourself. Better me than him, I whispered, kissing Jaime's hair. That evening, Luca waited in the library, sleeves rolled, a decanter half empty beside him. He listened as I told him about the center, about the director, about the peeling posters. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. You're not afraid to provoke, he said. I'm already provoked, I said. I'd rather do it with purpose. A flicker of something, pride maybe, crossed his face. Then you'll need protection that isn't invisible. They have to see it. I don't want to walk with soldiers, I protested. Not soldiers, he said. Symbols. The next morning, when I left the townhouse with Jaime, Marco was beside me as usual. But this time 2 women in dark coats followed at a distance. Not looming, not aggressive, just visible enough that the men on the corner who had been waiting melted away before we reached them. Subtle, I murmured. Loud enough, Marco said. The week blurred with meetings and lists. The school repairs moved fast. The community center's director called, her voice brusque but less wary. You really mean it, she said. I'll hold you to it. I began to understand what Luca had meant about architecture. Money was scaffolding. Names were bricks. Choices were mortar. The walls could rise or collapse depending on how steady you laid them. But walls attract attention. One night, after Jaime finally surrendered to sleep, the doorbell rang. Ava answered, then appeared in the living room with a face pale as paper. It's for you, she whispered. At the door stood the same man from the foyer days ago, the one with the slick hair and the heavy ring. He smiled too wide, hands in his pockets. Evening, he drawled. You've been busy, Mrs. Castellano. The name landed like a slap. That's not, I began. Doesn't matter, he said, cutting me off. What matters is you're making moves without understanding the board. Fixing schools, fixing centers. Looks nice, but it steps on toes. I felt Marco behind me before I saw him, a shadow solidifying. You should go, he said evenly. The man smirked. Tell your boss his wife's enthusiasm might need tempering. He tipped an invisible hat and sauntered down the steps, whistling. My hands shook as I shut the door. Wife, I whispered, the words sticking like glass. Marco's jaw tightened. He wanted you to hear it. When Luca came home later, I was waiting. I shoved the words at him before he could sit down. He called me your wife. He said I need tempering. Luca's eyes went black with something ancient. His name? I don't care about his name, I snapped. I care about what it means. They see me as a weakness, as leverage. No, he said, stepping closer. They see you as power. They're afraid of it. That's why they're testing. I shook my head, pressing a hand to my temple. I don't want to drag Jaime into this. If it means stepping back. His voice cut through mine, low and absolute. No. I looked up, startled. You don't step back, he said, softer now. If you step back, they'll come forward. If you stand, I'll make sure they fall back. That's the only equation they understand. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just protecting me. He was daring me to grow teeth. That night, while Jaime dreamed in the next room, I opened the drawer with the tin again. Alessandro's letter stared up at me. If you want more, come find me. I whispered into the dark. I found him. and he said from now on, "You're mine." The words didn't sound like surrender anymore. They sounded like warning. The next morning, a bouquet arrived at the townhouse. Not lilies, not daisies, blood-red roses. The stems wrapped in black ribbon. No card. Eva gasped. Marco swore under his breath. Lara examined them with gloves. Luca walked in as the roses were lowered into a trash bag. His jaw set. "This is the beginning," he said. "The beginning of what?" I asked. "The part," he said quietly, "where they stop whispering. You said, the roses haunted the air even after they were gone. The metallic tang of their scent clinging to my hands as though I'd touched iron instead of petals." Ava muttered prayers under her breath while she scrubbed the vase. Marco doubled the rounds around the block. Lara started carrying 2 phones, one for calls, one for silent alerts. But the quiet that followed wasn't relief. It was waiting. By the 3rd night, the waiting broke. I woke to a noise I couldn't name. Low, sharp, like a lock being tested. Jaime stirred, whimpering. I gathered him against my chest, moving to the nursery door just as footsteps sounded on the terrace. Lara's voice cut the dark. "Back away." Firm, cold. A pause. Then a man's laugh, too close, too casual. "Tell Castellano his charity case is costing him." I froze. My blood iced over. Not because of the words, but because the voice was the same one that had mocked me in the foyer. Marco thundered up the stairs. The scuffle was brief. The thud of bodies. The scrape of shoes against stone. Then silence. When Luca arrived minutes later, his shirt undone, his hair damp like he'd been pulled from a shower, his eyes locked on me before anyone else. "You're safe?" "Yes," I whispered, clutching Jaime so tight he squirmed. Marco spoke from the terrace, his voice controlled. "He's gone, but he left this. A card, plain white. The words handwritten in thick ink. Sit down. All we make you." Luca read it, jaw tight. He folded the card once, twice, then slid it into his pocket. "Noise is over," he said. "They've chosen fire." He left the terrace without looking back, his presence heavy enough to drag the room with him. The next day was a blur of motion. Extra guards appeared. Vehicles rotated at the curb. Jaime's stroller was checked twice before we left the townhouse. Then again before we came back. The walls of safety thickened until they felt like stone. I hated it. At lunch, I slammed my hand against the table. "This isn't life, Luca. This is prison with prettier sheets." He didn't flinch. "It's survival." "It's surrender," I shot back. "And I won't raise him in surrender." He leaned forward, his eyes dark and steady. "Then what will you do?" The question cut me open. I'd been waiting for him to tell me what the next step was. Instead, he'd turned the blade around, offered me the handle. I swallowed. "I'll fight. On my ground, not theirs." "Your ground," he echoed, studying me like I was a map he'd never seen before. "Then tell me where." "The school, the community center, places they can't touch without showing themselves. I'll make noise louder than theirs. If they want me to sit down, I'll stand taller." A long silence followed. Then Luca sat back, a slow nod forming. "Then we build higher walls in the places you choose." That evening I returned to the community center. The director met me at the door, arms crossed, eyes wary. "You're brave," she said. "Or foolish. You know men are already talking. They don't like women making decisions on their turf." "I'm not on their turf," I said. "I'm on mine." She studied me for a long beat, then let me in. Inside, kids played tag between cracked walls. A teenager hunched over a broken laptop looked up with hopeful eyes. I thought of the roses, the card, the voice on the terrace, and something inside me hardened. "We're going to fix this place," I told her. "And no one is going to stop us." Back at the townhouse, Luca was waiting in the library, a map spread across the table. He tapped a corner. "Their businesses. Their leverage. These are the places they'll press next." I hesitated, then moved closer. Jaime asleep in his carrier against my chest. Then we press first, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. His gaze lifted, slow and deliberate. You're not afraid anymore. I am, I admitted. But fear isn't going to raise my son. Something in his expression shifted. Pride, possession, something I couldn't name. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine where it rested on the map. From now on, he said softly, echoing that first claim. You're not just mine. You're theirs too. Everyone will know it. The next morning an article appeared, not the one about laundering, the one Luca had warned about. This one was different. Photos of me at the school, at the center, with Jaime on my hip, with the caption, "Single mom turned patron, taking on New York's broken system." I stared at the headline, my throat tight. This wasn't me, I whispered. No, Luca said from across the table. It was me. I gave them what I wanted them to see. And what's that? A woman who doesn't bend, he said. A mother who stands. Let them test that. The phone buzzed. Another message from the number that had been haunting me. You're playing with fire, and children burn fastest. My stomach twisted. I pushed the phone across the table to him. Luca read it, then set it down with deliberate calm. Then we stopped playing, he said. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the terrace with Jaime in my arms, the city below us humming with secrets. When I turned back, Luca was watching from the doorway, his silhouette carved against the house's warm light. You could leave, he said. Tonight, Marco would take you anywhere. No one would stop you. I shook my head, and they'd win. They'd teach me to hide. I won't give Jaime that lesson. For the first time, I saw relief flicker across his face. He stepped onto the terrace, close enough that our shadows overlapped. Then we stand, he said. Together. Together, I echoed, the word foreign but solid on my tongue. Inside, the phone buzzed again. A new message. Tomorrow, noon, Central Park. Come alone, or we finish this another way. I stared at the message until the words stopped being letters and turned into a door. Noon, Central Park. Come alone. The last two words glowed like a dare. Luca read it once, then again, his face going still in the way that meant motion was happening elsewhere. You won't go alone, he said. If I don't go, I countered, they finish this another way. We both know what that means. It means they want to choose the ground, he said evenly. You just told me you wouldn't let them. I paced the length of the study, the city's night pressing its palms to the windows. Jaime slept upstairs, the monitor's soft hiss reminding me that choices came with witnesses. What if I go on my terms? I asked. Visible. Daylight. A place where they can't make me disappear without showing their face. Central Park at noon is still their ground, he said. Too many exits. Too many places to hide a hand. Then we change it, I said, surprising myself with the heat in my voice. We pick the exact spot. We make it visible from 3 angles. We make sure no one can get within 5 feet without being seen. Luca's eyes narrowed, not with anger, calculation. He reached for the phone on the desk and spoke into it in low Italian that sounded like velvet braided with wire. When he hung up, he leaned back, studying me. If you go with eyes. No guards at your elbow, no spectacle. But eyes at every radius. Lara? I asked. And more, he said. Quiet ones, I exhaled. Then we go. He stilled. We? I nodded. I won't go alone. But I also won't let you turn it into a parade. You stay back, I walk in. You keep the net where they can't see it. A beat of silence, then a single nod. Agreed. Sleep came like a shallow tide that withdrew every time I closed my eyes. At dawn, Eva handed me coffee without comment. Her mouth pressed into a line that made me want to hug her and apologize for all the ways I'd broken the quiet of this house. She kissed Jaime's head and said, Be back for lunch, like it was a spell. At 11:40, the SUV glided to a stop on 5th, the park opening like a green mouth. I wore a plain dress, flats, no jewelry except the key pendant and the small ring on a chain. My hands were steady. My stomach was not. Lara stood at the curb, speaking into her mic with the calm cadence of someone setting a table. South end covered. North end covered. Midline clear. She lifted her eyes to mine. You know the rules. Don't be a hero, I recited. Don't be bait, she corrected, one corner of her mouth inching upward. Call if the wind changes, I walked. Beneath the arch, past a violinist coaxing something mournful from strings, toward the agreed spot. A bench with a clear view of the path, a lamppost, and a playground beyond where mothers pushed strollers and a nanny blew bubbles. Normal life was the best camouflage. He arrived at exactly noon. Not the slick-haired man. Someone older, smoother. His suit the color of smoke. His smile precise as a blade. He sat at the far end of the bench, leaving 2 feet between us, like he was meeting a colleague for a scheduled disappointment. Mrs. Castellano, he said. That's not my name, I said. He studied me with professional interest. You've made yourself useful, he said. Schools, centers, headlines, admirable, also inconvenient. For who? I asked. He folded his hands in his lap. For people who prefer the old arrangements. People like you. People like us, he corrected pleasantly. But we don't have to begin at disagreement. We can begin at alignment. I'm listening, I said, though my pulse thundered. You stop, he said simply. Not forever, just for now. You slow the charity. You pull back. We let the air cool. Everyone saves face. Your boy grows up unbothered. And if I don't, then the air warms, he said. And heat has a way of finding the most tender places. A bubble drifted across my sightline and burst. You sent the roses, I said. He smiled politely. I approve of tradition. And the man who came to my door? A zealot, he said with a little shrug. Zealots are tiresome. They make messes. We prefer talk. I turned to face him fully. Then talk to me like I'm not a guest in a room you own. Talk to me like the person who decides. He inclined his head slightly, as if conceding a point in a game. Very well. You're deciding fast in a world that punishes speed. You're putting your name on structures that used to be useful to other names. Slow down, and you'll have room to plant your garden. Sprint, and someone will misread your movement as a race. Maybe it is a race, I said, between the kids who need working wiring and the men who like the dark. He smiled without showing teeth. You have a talent for lines. Another one, between love of your boy and love of being seen. I felt the hit. He could tell. Before I could answer, a jogger stumbled near the bench and cursed softly in a way that sounded wrong. Lara's voice ticked in my ear from the tiny bud she'd insisted I wear. Clock 2, switch. Stay seated. I kept my body quiet. The jogger righted himself and moved on. The man beside me hadn't flinched. He knew there were eyes. He didn't care, or he wanted me to believe he didn't. Tell your boss, he continued, that building is admirable, but stability is essential. He knows how balance works. He used to know it better. Tell your friends, I said, that turning up at a woman's door and whispering threats under her window is how you get the lights turned on brighter. His gaze sharpened a fraction. This isn't a threat. It's a forecast. Then here's mine, I said, finding a steadiness I hadn't expected to find sitting next to a man who could unmake an afternoon. We're not stopping. We're not slowing. We're documenting, and we're choosing places you can't touch without leaving fingerprints. He sighed as if disappointed in a rookie who'd declined an easy out. Boldness is expensive, he said, standing. And bills come due. He stepped away. For a second I thought that was the end. That the showdown had been a conversation in a public park like strangers comparing weather. Then he turned back. The polite smile returned to his mouth, but not to his eyes. One more thing, he said. When you sit in a seat that isn't yours, you should be very sure whose plane you're on. The words landed like ice water. He nodded, the gesture almost affectionate, and blended into the crowd. A man on a lunchtime walk. Exit north, Lara said quietly in my ear. Now. I stood, legs remembering how to work, and headed toward the crosswalk where a woman with a stroller waited for the light. Halfway there, a cyclist cut fast across the path, too close. A hand jutted toward my shoulder. Marco materialized from air, palm against the cyclist's chest, a controlled stop that looked like kindness, and wasn't. Eyes up, he told the man, who scowled and pedaled away. Lara took my elbow. Car, she said. In the SUV, I inhaled once, twice, like a diver told the surface was still inches away. He knew, I said. About the seat. About the plane. They know the origin story, Lara said. It's cleaner than most. Back at the townhouse, Luca waited in the library, hands braced on the table. When I finished recounting the conversation, he didn't sit. He looked at the ceiling, at a point beyond it, and laughed once without humor. Of course it's him. Name, I said. He considered, then gave it to me like a blade-handed hilt first. Rinaldo Serrano. Friend? I asked. Never, he said. Neighbor in a city with no fences. What did he mean about the plane? I pressed. He meant nothing you don't already know, Luca said. That you sat where you weren't expected. That I made a claim. That now he wants to test whether the claim or the woman matters more. Which does? I asked, because the answer mattered in ways I couldn't yet name. You, he said, like it was obvious and also the only strategy. The rest of the day tasted metallic. I played with Jaime on the rug while messages pinged on phones I wasn't supposed to see. Contractors sent updates from the school. The community center director texted a photo of a freshly painted wall. We keep going. I typed back we do, and felt the word like a rung on a ladder. At dusk, an envelope slid under the front door. Eva froze. Marco retrieved it with tongs. Inside, a photocopy of a tabloid mock-up. My face, Jaime on my hip, a headline with my name twisted into something cruel. A date stamp for 2 days from now. They're telegraphing, Lara said, disgust thinly veiled. Trying to scare you into moving first. Then we move, I said, surprising us all. We do a piece before they do. We invite cameras into places they won't follow. We make our story expensive to lie about. Luca studied me for a heartbeat that felt like a vow. Tomorrow, he said, we show them the rooms you're building. That night I sat on the floor of the nursery and watched Jaime sleep, the moon stitching silver across his cheeks. I pressed the key pendant to my lips, tasting metal and a future that wanted naming. I thought about the man on the bench, the warning wrapped like an invitation. I thought about the wrong seat and how a mistake had turned into a geometry problem. Angles, lines of sight, exits that were also entrances. I texted Luca from the hallway rather than say it out loud, because some admissions need glass between them and air. I was afraid in the park. I went anyway. I'll go again. His reply came fast. Being mine will never require fearlessness. Only truth. I typed, then here's truth. I'm staying. 3 dots then. Then I build around you until the wind has to ask permission to pass. In the quiet that followed, the house felt less like a cage, and more like a frame for something we hadn't finished drawing. Outside, sirens wove a thin line through the city's throat. Inside, my boy breathed, and my bones decided to learn a new word for brave. Tomorrow they'd bring cameras. Tomorrow we'd step into light not as spectacle, but as structure. If the world wanted to test whether the claim or the woman mattered more, I would give it the answer in daylight, with witnesses, with rooms that existed whether anyone approved or not. The wrong seat had become the seat I chose, and if someone wanted to pull it out from under me, they would have to show their hands. Morning came with a sky the color of tin and a forecast that promised sun by noon. Eva ironed a simple blouse I hadn't known I owned. Lara coordinated routes as if mapping arteries. Marco checked vehicles, then checked them again. The house felt like a backstage. Props in place, cues rehearsed, everyone pretending not to look at the clock. At 9, Luca appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, sleeves rolled, tie in his pocket like a concession he'd won from himself. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said, hitching Jaime on my hip. He grabbed at the key pendant and laughed, unaware that the world had sent us an appointment with itself. The first stop was the school. Contractors had peeled back ceiling tiles, exposing old pipes like bones. A foreman, skeptical the first time we met, shook my hand with a grip that had decided to trust. "We'll have the wiring finished by the end of the week," he said. "Lights that turn on when you ask them to. Miracles, right? Miracles are just budgets that behave," I said, and he chuckled like I'd told a secret. The cameras arrived cautious, noses twitching for blood but finding fresh paint. A local reporter I recognized from evening news shook my hand. "Off the record?" she said, voice pitched low. "Why poke the hornet's nest?" "Because kids were getting stung," I answered, and watched her eyes change. We did the walk-through with mics clipped to my collar and to the principal's lapel. I refused a stage shot at a chalkboard. I let the rooms be themselves. When the reporter asked about laundering, I didn't flinch. "The account is mine. The decisions are mine," I said. "If you want proof, I'll show you the statements, with names redacted to protect donors who aren't trying to be famous." "You're not worried about painting a target on your back?" She pressed. "I already have one," I said. "I may as well paint it myself." She blinked, then nodded like someone who had just been handed a better headline than she expected. From there, we drove to the community center. The director, grayer today, less granite, met us with a set of keys that looked like they'd been inherited from a prior century. "You asked if we were serious," I reminded her softly. "You showed up," she said. "Serious enough." Kids swarmed the gym, a tide of noise and knees. The cameras caught laughter bouncing off cracked walls. We stood together in a room that smelled like cleaning fluid and effort, and the reporter asked the question she'd been saving. "Aren't you worried that making yourself this visible will invite more attention from people who don't like what you're doing?" I thought of roses and a black ribbon, a bench in Central Park, a man with a smoke-colored suit talking about forecasts. "Visibility isn't the danger," I said. "What happens in the dark is." We finished by noon. As we packed up, the reporter slipped me a card. "If they smear you," she said, "call me first. Don't let the tabloids eat this story before the facts do." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. Back in the SUV, the city's hum came through the windows like electricity. Jaime slept with his mouth open, dreams sucking on absence like it tasted good. I opened my phone to a cluster of messages. Lisa had written, "Saw you on the 10 a.m. cut-in." "Holy hell, Ellie. You look like you own the room." I typed back, trying to. She sent a string of hearts and a knife emoji that made me laugh harder than I should have. "Enjoying yourself?" Luca asked, amused. "No," I said, still smiling. "But I'm breathing." His mouth twitched. "I'll take it." We were 3 blocks from the townhouse when the world pivoted. Lara's voice sharpened in my ear. "Hold, reroute, vehicle tails at 6 and 9. Marco turned right when he should have gone straight. The SUV behind us hesitated, then followed. Another slid from a side street. The hair on my arms prickled. "Stay calm," Lara said. "We're not stopping at home." "Where?" Marco asked. "Plan C," Lara answered, and Marco smiled like Plan C owed him money. We zigzagged through streets that felt suddenly narrower. The cars stayed a length behind, patient as sharks. A light went yellow. Marco accelerated just enough to make it and leave them at the red. "2 down," he murmured. "We'll see who cares enough to ignore pedestrian right-of-way." They did. One ran the light. A horn bellowed. A pedestrian yelled creative things. One, Lara counted. 9 o'clock vehicle circling. Copy, Marco said. We pulled into an underground garage whose shutter began to descend the moment our tires kissed the threshold. The pursuer tried to follow. The gate slammed to a stop 6 inches above the hood. Brakes shrieked. Metal squealed. Lara was already out, talking to a man in a blue jacket who looked like a manager you didn't want to disappoint. Who owns this place? I whispered. Friend of a friend, Luca said. The kind that doesn't need names. We waited 10 minutes. My pulse refused to unclench. Jaime slept on, as oblivious to enemy tales as to electric bills. When Lara slid back into the seat, her expression had entered its winter. We'll take the service exit, she said. Home later. Not now. The service exit spat us into an alley with sunlight like a secret. Marco threaded us through streets so narrow they felt like escape valves. When we reached the river, the city looked like it had been rearranged and forgot to tell us. We stopped at the cafe Luca had called one of ours. Inside, staff pretended not to notice that we were a procession. The barista set warm milk in a paper cup on the counter without looking up. For the piccolo, he said, and went back to tamping espresso. We took a corner table. Luca sat across from me, hands folded, eyes quiet. You did well, he said. I sat on a bench and didn't cry, I said. Bar is low. It's higher than you think, he said. My phone buzzed. A push alert from the local news. Community center renovation moves ahead with private funds. The thumbnail showed me next to the director, both of us mid-sentence. No makeup, no filter. The copy below the image read, Ellie Sullivan, a single mother, says transparency is her answer to whisper campaigns. That'll help, Lara said, scanning her own feed. The more you control the narrative, the harder it is to paint you as a ghost. Ghosts are useful, Marco muttered, but not for this. We were halfway through one shared pastry, Jaime stealing crumbs with an air of criminal triumph, when the door chimed and the room chilled. Ronaldo Serrano walked in like he owned all the chairs in the city. His suit was the same smoke color. His smile had been sharpened. Afternoon, he said, as if bumping into us were an accident the universe arranged to amuse itself. Lara stood without standing. The room went alert. Ronaldo lifted both palms in a soft surrender. Relax, he said mildly. Public place, cameras. I'm only here for coffee. He ordered at the counter, paid cash, and took the table beside ours instead of literally any of the empty ones. Good piece, he told me, nodding toward my phone. Very civic. Thanks, I said, keeping my voice neutral. He sipped. You know tabloid deadlines? He asked conversationally. They lock covers on Wednesdays. Sources get paid on Tuesdays. It's a lovely calendar. Trying to teach me your job? I asked. Trying to give you a choice, he said. Pay for quiet. Or enjoy the music. Luca didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. His gaze slid to Ronaldo like a shadow shifting to cover a stain. You walked in here on purpose, he said. You picked the one table that would make this a picture. Ronaldo smiled. You have me confused with paparazzi. I prefer not to be seen. Today is an exception. Considerate. Collegiality. He stood, placed a business card on the edge of our table. A simple white rectangle with nothing but a number. If you tire of fixing ceilings, he said to me, call. We can discuss how not to make the floor collapse. He left with the coffee, the door chiming, the room exhaling. Marco picked up the card with 2 fingers like it was a bug. Trash? He asked. Evidence, Lara said, sliding it into a bag. The cafe's owner approached our table, expression apologetic and ferocious. Mi dispiace, he murmured to Luca. He won't come again. It's fine, Luca said, voice like a plane of ice. He wanted a picture. He didn't get one. He was wrong. Someone across the room had managed a shot. Nothing dramatic. Just a frame where Ronaldo's shoulder blurred into ours. my profile turned toward the window, Luca's hand hovering near Jaime's back, protective without touching. It hit social within the hour with a caption that asked more questions than it answered. Back at the townhouse, via another route, another garage, another set of eyes, the afternoon staggered toward evening. Eva cooked soup that tasted like someone remembered what comfort was. Jaime clapped at a spoon. A delivery arrived with no card. Inside, children's books in Italian and English. On the packing slip, a typed note, "For the rooms you're building." Or I looked up at Luca. He read the slip and didn't scowl. He smiled, small and terrible. "He thinks he can write himself inside this house," he said. "He can't." "Then don't let him," I said. "We won't," he answered. The local news aired the school piece at 6. The reporter used my line about painted targets. Social watchers called it gutsy or naive or both. The tabloid mock-up didn't appear. Whether they'd missed their theft window or decided the angle didn't sell anymore, I couldn't know. I only knew the city looked a fraction different, a crowd shifting its weight. After Jaime slept, I stood on the terrace and watched the river cut a steel line through the borough. Luca joined me, hands in his pockets. "You feel it?" he asked. "What?" "The ground moving under your feet and deciding not to throw you off." I laughed quietly. "Is that your romantic speech?" "It's the best I have," he said. I reached for the pendant out of habit. My fingers found the small ring beside it. The metal warmed, a touch passed back. "You said being yours would never require fearlessness," I murmured. "Only truth." "Still true," he said. "Then here's mine," I said, turning to face him. The wrong seat wasn't wrong. It was the only one that could have forced me to learn how to sit. He didn't reach for me. He didn't need to. The city hummed, the house breathed, and somewhere, a press ran ink over paper that didn't include my face. Tomorrow would ask for more. It always did. But tonight the door I'd chosen stayed under my hand and I felt it. Not a cage. A hinge. The next morning, the city woke up acting like it had seen something new, and wasn't sure whether to pretend it hadn't. The cafe owner texted a photo of the clipped news segment playing above the counter. The school sent a thank you email written in the breathless grammar of people who'd run out of ways to say relief. The community center's director called and didn't bother with hello. "You coming by today?" she asked. "I've got a list that would make a saint swear." "I'm coming," I said, and meant it like a promise to myself. On the way, Lara watched the mirrors the way chess players watch diagonals. Marco drove as if the road belonged to us, but we were polite about borrowing it. Jaime napped, then woke to point at buses like they were whales. The center smelled different. Fresh paint and something like cinnamon. The director glanced at my carrier and snorted. "Who brings a baby to a construction site?" "A general," I said. "He inspects." She almost smiled. "Your inspector's got good timing." The laptop shipment came. "We'll need power strips, and a miracle for the Wi-Fi." "I'm better with power than miracles," I said. "But we can test both." By noon, the gym sounded like hope. Kids cheering a volunteer who'd fixed a bent goal, a tutor testing keyboards with the solemnity of a priest. I stayed out of the way, and in the middle at once, answering questions, signing for deliveries, showing the reporter's number to a skeptical donor who wanted to know if any of this was real. It felt real until it didn't. The fire alarm screamed at 2:17 p.m. The sound punched my ribs from the inside. Volunteers froze. Kids looked around, then at me, eyes wide. Lara was already moving, voice firm, shepherding bodies toward exits. "Calm, please. Hands on the rope. Walk, don't run." Smoke curled down the far hallway, thin and purposeful. Marco vanished into it with another guard. The director swore a full sentence under her breath and grabbed the fire extinguisher like it had insulted her personally. Outside, the kids coughed into sleeves. Sirens grew from far to near. I counted heads while Lara counted them again, our lists overlapping until they matched. "All out," she said. "Everyone." Marco emerged 10 minutes later, jacket streaked, eyes watering, a rag stuffed in his collar. "Small," he said. "Deliberate." He held up a charred wad of something that used to be paper. Rag stuffed behind a vent. Ignition taped to a timer. The fire captain glanced between us and the director, then nodded the way professionals do when they recognize other professionals. "Camera coverage?" he asked. "Everywhere," Laura said. "Good," he said, "because whoever set this wanted a message, not a blaze." As if the day hadn't gotten the memo, a plain sedan glided to the curb minutes later. A man stepped out with a clipboard and a look that made me want to sanitize the air. "City inspection," he said to the director, badge flashing. Anonymous complaint. "We're issuing a stop work order pending review." The director's laugh sounded like it wanted to be a scream. "You've got to be kidding." "Procedure," he said, and slapped a red paper on the door like an insult. He turned to leave. I stepped into his path. "Inspector, what's your name?" He hesitated, then showed the badge again. "D. Morales." "Mr. Morales," I said evenly. "The complaint was anonymous. The fire was contained. The cameras are rolling, and our permits are in order." I held up the folder Laura had made me memorize, the one with stamps and signatures that made rooms legal. "You can pause the work. You can't close the doors on kids who have nowhere else to go." He looked at the folder, at my face, at the director behind me who looked ready to use the extinguisher in creative ways. His jaw shifted. "I have to follow procedure," he repeated, but it sounded thinner. "Follow it," I said. "Review the footage. We'll be here tomorrow, so will the press." He left with the air of a man who had been told to finish a job and found the instructions out of date. When the kids were safely bused to the school for the afternoon session, the director leaned against the doorframe and lit a cigarette she didn't smoke. "You making enemies," she said, blowing nothing into air. "They were already there," I said. "I'm just meeting them in daylight." Back at the townhouse, Eva met us with water, and the look she wore when she was trying not to show she'd been praying. Jaime clapped at the sight of her, then at the glass because it caught the light. Luca appeared in the doorway, took one look at Marco's jacket, and went still. "Small fire," Laura reported. "Intentional, controlled." Inspection hit us minutes later. "Order posted." Luca's face didn't change, but the temperature in the room did. "He's escalating," he said, a diagnosis more than a complaint. "Then escalate back," I said. My voice surprised me. "Legally, publicly. We hold an open day at the center tomorrow under safety review. We invite parents. We live stream. We show the permits. We show the camera stills to the inspector, and, if he doesn't move, we show them to the reporter." "You want to force his hand," Luca said. "I want to turn their message into ours," I said. A long moment, the kind that sifts people. Then he nodded once. "Done." The night hollowed out and refilled with lists. Eva made soup and put the bowl in my hands. Laura cut the video into a clean, undeniable sequence. Marco's crew rewired the fire panel. The director sent me a photo of kids drawing posters that said "open" in shaky letters that looked like a shout. At midnight, when the house finally held still, I went to the bedroom, opened the nightstand, and reached for the tin with my father's letter. The ritual I'd fallen into when the day needed a weight to end it. The tin wasn't there. For a second I thought I'd put it somewhere safe and forgotten. I pulled the drawer out and set it on the bed. Nothing. I pulled the lower drawer. Nothing. My breath came short. A sheet of paper lay on the wood at the very back, so flat it almost didn't cast a shadow. I slid it out with 2 fingers and recognized the crispness of a fresh copy. It was the letter, photocopied. My name black on white. The signature, AC, and below it, in thick marker that had bled through, mine. The room tilted. I sat down because the floor felt like water. "Luca," I called, and my voice sounded like it had found its own echo. He came fast, took in the drawer on the bed, the paper in my hand, the color pulled from my face. He didn't ask what, he asked how. When? Sometime today, I whispered. We weren't home. Lara arrived in seconds, eyes already tracking the frame, the latch, the hinges. No sign of a forced entry, she murmured. Someone with a key, or someone who knew the rhythm of the house. Marco's jaw tightened. Staff? Never, Eva said from the doorway, voice shaking not with fear but with insulted loyalty. Never. Luca took the copy from my hand like he was taking a blade and set it on the dresser. They want to move the battlefield into our room, he said softly. They want to make the story personal. It already is, I said. The steadiness that rose in me didn't feel like courage. It felt like anger deciding to be useful, and tomorrow we will make it public. He looked at me then with something like reverence and something like regret. You understand, he said, that once we cross that line, there's no going back. There wasn't anyway, I whispered. The day I took your seat. Morning came fast and didn't ask permission. We arrived at the center to find parents already gathered, kids holding handmade open signs, a few reporters orbiting the crowd. The red stop work order glared on the door. The inspector, Morales, appeared at 10 sharp, eyes tired, clipboard in hand. Behind him, a man in a better suit watched like a supervisor who didn't like being seen. I stepped onto the top stair and lifted the mic Lara had set on a stand. My name is Ellie Sullivan, I said. This building is a promise. Yesterday someone tried to smoke us out of it. Today we invite the city to watch us fix it. Cameras clicked. Kids cheered like church. The director folded her arms and blinked fast. Inspector Morales has procedures, I continued. We respect them. We have permits. We have footage. We have parents who won't accept rolling blackouts on their children's futures. I looked straight at Morales. Sir, if your procedure says shut this door, tell these families why, with the cameras on. He swallowed. The man in the better suit stepped forward, whispering in his ear. Morales looked at the whisperer, then at the kids, then at the better suit again. He took the stop work order off the door. Temporary clearance, he said, voice steadying. Pending final review. The crowd erupted. The better suit scowled and moved away, making a call. Lara's eyes tracked him like a hawk. After handshakes and paperwork and 3 moms hugging me with the intensity of people who hadn't planned to, I ducked into the office to breathe. My phone buzzed on cue. A new message from the same number. Cute speech. Keep talking. We're listening from closer than you think. I forwarded it to Lara, then to the reporter with a single line. If I go missing from my own house, start here. I didn't send it to Luca. He was already moving chess pieces 3 turns ahead. Instead, I texted him. He was inside our room. His response came from the SUV parked half a block down. Then the house changes locks tonight. And tomorrow we change the city. I put the phone face down and looked around the office. Mismatched chairs, a corkboard with flyers, a window that stuck. A place that had been asked to hold too much, now holding a little more. The wrong seat had become a stage, a desk, a stair, a door. If they wanted to write mine across my life, I would answer with hours in letters they couldn't erase. Outside, a kid shouted my name to show me a drawing of a house with a big door and windows spilling light. It's your house, he said proudly. No, I said, crouching to meet his eyes. It's yours. Behind him, Lara's phone lit with a photo from a street cam. A tall man in a smoke-colored suit passing under our townhouse awning at 9:13 a.m., smiling at the camera like he'd been invited. The hinge had moved. The door was open. The climax was no longer coming. It had crossed our threshold. That night, the house breathed like it knew it had been breached. Marco's team swept every hinge, every lock, every frame. Lara installed sensors that hummed when passed, their lights like eyes. Eva burned sage in the kitchen while muttering in Spanish, the smoke twisting like a prayer. But no one said the obvious. He had already been inside. I lay in bed with Jaime curled against me, his hand gripping the chain that held the key pendant and ring. Every creak of the townhouse felt like a whisper. At 3 in the morning, a single thought cut through. They're not afraid of locks. They're afraid of light. At dawn, I walked into the library where Luca sat with a file open, a map of the city spread across the desk. His eyes looked carved from stone. "I want a press conference," I said. His head lifted. "You want to invite them?" "I want to make it impossible for them to pretend this is shadows," I said. "They want me scared quiet. I want them cornered by their own noise." He studied me like I was an equation that solved itself. "If you do this, you can't walk it back." "I know." He closed the file. "Then we prepare." The next day, cameras lined the steps of the community center. Parents crowded close, kids perched on shoulders. Reporters angled microphones like weapons disguised as tools. I wore the blouse Eva pressed and no makeup, because truth doesn't need polish. Luca stood 3 steps behind me, hands clasped. His presence not decoration but declaration. "My name is Ellie Sullivan," I began, voice steadier than my stomach. "I'm a mother. I'm a daughter. I'm someone who once sat in the wrong seat on a plane and ended up in a story bigger than my life." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I didn't stop. They told me to sit down. They told me to stop. They sent flowers with black ribbons, notes through my door, smoke through the vents where children play. And when I didn't bend, they came inside my house. Gasps, scribbles, cameras clicking. My heart hammered. I'm not hiding. Not from them, not from you. If something happens to me, you know who. If something happens to my son, you know who. And if nothing happens, it's because the light is too bright for them to move. The director of the center stepped beside me, her gravel voice carrying. "This woman's putting her name on what matters. If you don't like her, fine. But the ceiling won't collapse on our kids again. That's not crime. That's community." The cheer that rose wasn't polite. It was hungry. Reporters shouted questions. "Who are you accusing? Do you fear for your safety? What role does Mr. Castellano play?" I answered each. "I'm accusing anyone who thinks fear should run this city. I fear for nothing except silence." "And Mr. Castellano's role?" I turned, catching Luca's gaze. "He stands with me. Not in front, not behind, with." The feed went live. Hashtags spawned before the conference ended. On wrong seat, right fight. I'd no light over noise. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from Lisa, from the school, from strangers. One read simply, "Don't stop." We needed someone to say it. That night, the retaliation arrived. At 11:42, the sensors hummed low. Laura's voice crackled through the radio. "Rear perimeter, movement." Marco and 2 guards shifted, weapons drawn but unseen. I grabbed Jaime from his crib, clutching him against my chest, his warm body heavy with sleep. "Safe room," Eva urged, but I couldn't make my feet move. Then the window in the library shattered. Glass exploded onto the carpet. A bottle clattered, flames licking its throat. Marco was there before fire could spread, smothering it with a heavy blanket. Luca appeared in the doorway, pistol in hand, his expression pure storm. Outside, tires screeched. A car tore away down the block. Lara's voice, plate captured. "Sending now." The flames died, leaving smoke curling like questions. I held Jaime tighter, my throat raw. "They crossed a line," Luca said, voice low enough to chill the air. "And now we erase it." The following morning, the headlines weren't theirs. They were mine. Single mother targeted after exposing threats. Flames at center of fight for city's future. Reporters camped outside the townhouse. Supporters taped signs to the gate. "We stand with Ellie. Ours, not theirs." Kids from the school mailed drawings of houses with bright doors. But the threat wasn't gone. It had only grown teeth. At noon, Luca called me into the study. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, photographs of Ronaldo Serrano shaking hands with men in government offices, sitting courtside at games, smiling with mayors. He thinks he's untouchable, Luca said. He isn't. What are you going to do? I asked. He leaned forward. What we're going to do. You've already stripped his shadows. Now we finish the frame. He outlined it. Leaked footage of the attempted fire, copies of the threatening notes, testimonies from parents who'd seen men loitering near the center. But he didn't stop there. We tie his money to the properties you've already touched. We show the city that when you repair, his profits vanish. We make him the villain of his own neighborhood. Won't that make him strike harder? I asked. Yes, Luca said. But it will also make him visible. And men like him can't survive in daylight. I looked at the photographs, at the grin on Serrano's face. My hands shook, not from fear, but from something harder. Then let's drag him into the sun. That evening, we recorded a statement in the very room Serrano had tried to burn. Kids filled the background, their drawings taped to the walls. Jaime gurgled in my lap. I spoke into the camera with every ounce of steadiness I'd learned since the wrong seat. They told me I was his, I said, nodding once toward Luca off camera. But here's the truth, I belong to my son. To these families. To this city. And if that makes me dangerous to men who profit from silence, then I'll keep being dangerous. When the clip aired, social ignited. Not just sympathy, momentum. Other neighborhoods called. Other directors reached out. Other mothers wrote. Serrano's name trended for the first time in his career, and not the way he liked. That night, while the house finally exhaled, I stood on the terrace, the city breathing with me. Luca joined me, silent, his hand brushing mine just enough to let me choose. I think the seat was never wrong, I whispered. It was always waiting. He smiled then, small and tired and real. And from the moment you took it, he said, echoing the vow that had started it all, you were mine. No, I said softly, touching the key at my throat. I was never just yours, I was ours, and now the city knows it. The night didn't answer, but the air felt changed, less like threat, more like horizon. Tomorrow would bring fire or light. But tonight, the wrong seat had turned into the only one I was meant to keep. Morning arrived with proof that momentum had teeth. The first call was from the local station. They wanted a sit-down in the community center, not on a studio set. The second was from a councilwoman's office asking for background, and any materials you can legally share. The third was the one that made my stomach flip, an assistant, U.S. attorney requesting a conversation, off the record. At first, Luca listened to the messages with the expression he reserved for weather forecasts he had already felt in his bones. It's moving, he said. Keep it moving. We began with the center. The kids had turned the broken window into a paper mural, tapes and crayons sealing a wound with color. The director stood beside me, hands on hips, ready to fight the next 10 years. The reporter arrived with a smaller crew this time, and a tone that had lost its appetite for spectacle. She wanted facts. We gave her video stills, the copy of the letter Serrano's people had slid into my house, and a timeline that made coincidence look like what it was. Denial in a better suit. Do you fear retaliation for naming him? She asked. I fear silence more, I said. Retaliation is loud. We can point a camera at it. By noon, the councilwoman's staffer had a conference room ready in a municipal building that smelled like old paper and newer ambition. Lara flanked the door. Marco watched the hallway with a guard's patience. I laid out our binder. Permits, photos, timestamps, donations, the stop work order removed under pressure, and spoke in sentences that could be read into the record if they had to be. The staffer took notes cleanly, then asked, What do you want? Protection for the center and the school, I said. Independent inspections, not anonymous complaints. Relief funds for emergency repairs that don't require knowing the right last names. And an investigator who will look at who profits when roofs collapse. She nodded. Not promising, not performing, just putting scaffolding under asks that would outlast my voice. At 4, The AUSA call happened in a quiet office that could have been the waiting room for bad news. He was young enough to have faith in process, and old enough to hide it. "You're very visible," he said without preamble. "That's the point," I answered. He tapped a pen against a legal pad. "We've had Serrano's name on corkboards with red string for years. Never enough to pull it tight. You've made mistakes harder." "Good," I said. "How do we make them impossible?" He didn't smile. "With patience. With paper. With people willing to testify when the room gets hot." I looked at the door, then back at him. "I can stand in heat." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to keep showing up with names that aren't yours." He held my gaze. "The rest, some of it, is our job." Outside, the late light made the buildings look like they'd been polished. Luca was waiting in the hallway, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable in a way I'd learned meant relief he wouldn't name out loud. "How bad?" he asked softly. "It's good," I said. "And slow." He nodded once. "Slow is real." That night, the city posted video from a traffic cam. Serrano's smoke-colored suit sliding past our awning, time-stamped 9:13 a.m. Our neighbors saw it. The cafe posted a polite note. "We serve coffee, not threats." The school's PTA put out a statement with 0 adjectives and 1 clean point. "We won't be intimidated." The momentum felt like a river changing course, not because anyone pushed, but because enough of us dug together at the banks. Serrano responded in the only way he knew. Lawyer letters, sharp and sterile, accusing us of defamation. "Good," Lara said, flipping pages that had the personality of drywall. "Discovery cuts both ways." Marco grinned like a man who appreciated the symmetry of due process and street process uniting for once. We didn't stop. The open day at the center became a series. Parents brought food. Volunteers repaired benches and pried. The inspector who'd ripped the stop work order returned with a clipboard and a different expression. "Final clearance," he said, signing with a flourish like penance. The better-suited supervisor was conspicuously absent. 2 weeks later, something happened I wouldn't have predicted the day I took the wrong seat. People started asking me to speak. Not to them, for them. A housing meeting in a church basement. A PTA after a work shift. A clinic that needed a donor to underwrite weekend hours. I said yes only when I could point a camera at the room and a contractor at the roof. Luca never tried to stand at any of those microphones. Sometimes he wasn't in the room at all. Sometimes he leaned against the back wall. A silhouette with his phone face down in his palm. The posture of a man who had repaved roads and now let others drive. When people whispered Castellano, they did it with curiosity now, not only with fear. "I don't recognize it," I admitted one night on the terrace, the city flickering like a thought I couldn't finish. "What?" he asked. The feeling of the ground not trying to throw me. I smiled. "You'd called it romance." He huffed a quiet laugh. "It's still the best I have." We didn't win every day. The tabloid cover finally appeared, late and lazy, a collage of half-truths arranged to look like revelation. It sank within hours under the weight of better stories, and the hashtag kids at the center had made with poster paint. Chuck open doors, open minds. A rumor claimed the fire had been staged. The Fire Captains Union posted a short, salty statement that ended the topic with the authority of people who run toward flames. A council aide tried to sandbag a vote. The live stream made him a star for exactly one evening, and not in the way his mother would clip for the fridge. Then, 3 weeks after the press conference, the photo hit. Not mine. Serrano's. Grainy, zoomed, but legible. The smoke-colored suit, the handshake with a deputy commissioner whose name had terrified small businesses for a decade. The picture ran above the fold on a respectable paper with a headline that sounded like a door opening. City deputy under investigation after ties to local fixer surface. Luca read it twice, then a third time, the satisfaction in his face tempered by something older than victory. He finally misjudged his reflection. he said. He thought the mirror was an ally. What happens now? I asked. Parts of the city remember how to clean itself, he said. He'll throw people at the problem. They'll step back. He'll throw money. It won't stick. He'll try noise. We'll make it music, the AUSA called. His voice had lost the cautious quiet. We're convening a grand jury, he said. If you hear nothing, it means everything is happening. If you hear a lot, it means the wheels are stuck. Either way, keep your evidence neat, he paused, and keep breathing. I hung up and laughed, the sound manic with relief. He told me to keep breathing. Wise, Luca said. Harder than it sounds. We celebrated the way people with a baby and multiple security shifts do. Spaghetti at the kitchen table, a shared glass of wine, a dance with Jaime to a song that made Eva cry into the dish towel because she is the oldest kind of romantic. Later, on the terrace, Luca took my hand without asking and pressed it once. Not promise, not performance, just acknowledgement. You never asked me to love you, I said into the quiet, the word easier now that it wasn't a trap. I never will, he said. I know. I turned the small ring on the chain, felt the cool of the key against my skin. I learned how to sit, I said. You learned something too. What? He asked. That you don't have to be the whole wall. Sometimes the room holds. He considered that like an architectural drawing. Sometimes, he agreed, and his mouth softened into a real smile that looked like something earned. When the arrest warrants finally came down, 2 mid-level enforcers, a building inspector who had enjoyed envelopes, a cousin with too much access, the city didn't cheer. It exhaled. That's how you know a story has shifted from spectacle to structure. No confetti, just people arriving 5 minutes early to work because the door opens on the first try. Serrano wasn't in cuffs on camera. Men like him rarely are. He was named in filings that had the patience of glaciers. His lawyers snarled words like frivolous and vendetta. The AUSA's office used words like pattern and enterprise. I learned new language and recognized old lies. We kept showing up with the camera and the contractor, and the child whose handwriting on a poster made adults adjust their spines. One afternoon, as summer pressed its palm to the city's shoulder, the center held a small ceremony. The mural the kids had made from paper to cover the broken window had been replicated in glass by a local artist. Light poured through it like proof. The director said 3 sentences and stopped because her voice broke. Parents clapped with the energy of people who had clapped before and been disappointed, and had decided to try again anyway. Say something, the director whispered, nudging me to the little stand with the cheap microphone. I looked at the room that had almost burned and now felt fireproof. I thought of a bench in Central Park, a bottle in the night, a copy of a letter left in a drawer like a dare. I thought of a wrong seat on a plane and a man who had claimed me with a sentence that didn't feel like a cage anymore. My name is Ellie Sullivan, I said, and the room hushed like a friend leaning in. I used to think security was a door that locked. Now I think it's a room full of people who won't let anyone close it. Applause rose, not loud, but deep. When it faded, I found Luca at the back, hands in his pockets, eyes bright. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. His whole posture said what he'd learned to say without words, with. That night, after Jaime surrendered to sleep and the city softened to its hum, we sat on the terrace with 2 mugs of tea and enough quiet to hear our own bones. He turned to me, the caution gone from his face, leaving only the man. From now on, he said, not repeating the old vow but revising it, you're not mine. We're ours. I laughed into my cup, the sound spilling like light through glass. Deal, I said. On one condition. He waited. If I ever take the wrong seat again, I said, you don't drag me out. You sit down next to me and make it right. He considered the terms for a second that felt like a ceremony, then nodded once. Sequence, he said. Only sequence. Jaime murmured in his sleep through the monitor, a small sound like the city agreeing. The door under my hand felt warm, not because of fear, but because of friction earned in forward motion. Somewhere, a press printed words that weren't ours and didn't need to be. Our story had escaped the page. It lived in rooms with working lights and roofs that kept rain on the correct side. The wrong seat was still there, in my memory and beneath everything we'd built. But it wasn't an accident anymore. It was an axis. And around it, the world had learned a new balance. A year later, the city felt different under my feet. Not safer, not softer, but sharper in ways that made sense. The school had lights that flicked on without flickering. The community center had glass where paper once hung. Parents who had once whispered, "Be careful," now said, "What's next?" Serrano's name still lingered in certain corners, muttered with resentment or denial, but not power. His empire had become a puzzle missing too many pieces. The AUSA sent updates I didn't always read because I no longer needed confirmation that the ground had shifted. At home, life found its rhythm. Jaime learned words faster than I could keep track. His favorite was open, shouted at doors, windows, books, arms. Eva claimed he got it from me. I claimed he got it from her. Luca only smiled, quiet and proud, and sometimes whispered aperto in Italian, so Jaime grew up knowing the sound in both tongues. Some nights I still woke at small noises, the echo of glass breaking, the phantom scent of smoke. But instead of spiraling, I listened. To my son's breathing, to the hum of the house, to the way the city itself seemed to inhale and exhale with us. Fear was still there, but it had learned its place. On the anniversary of the first press conference, the director insisted we come to the center. The kids had drawn a mural that stretched the length of the wall. Bright chairs, open doors, figures holding hands. In the corner, smaller letters scrawled by dozens of little hands. "Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Luca." He looked at the wall, then at me, his eyes unreadable in the way they got when the past pressed too hard. I touched the key pendant at my throat, and the ring beside it, still not on my finger but always within reach. "We sat in the wrong seat," I whispered. He smiled, small and real, and stayed. When we left, Jaime clapped at the mural like he understood the meaning. Maybe he did. Kids sometimes know the things we overthink. The city was still noisy, still flawed, still unfinished. But for the first time, it felt like a place where the wrong seat could turn into the right foundation, someone else's story. It was ours,